And we are streaming. Do 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 do.
Oh yeah,
Cool.
got it like already.
Yep. So we are we already have our video swap reversed in this scene. As I recall, we didn't do it in the other scene.
What's that?
Which is going to be fun. Just confusing slightly to people who won't notice. This particular scene, see, we're not swapped left and right. Remember?
Oh.
But here we are, which is good and fine. Okay, so let's grab the YouTube links.
Well, the mirror image is to help us navigate the screen better.
Yeah.
Not them.
Yeah. No big deal. Okay, so we'll share that up. Just getting started, and of course our title is probably not that. Shall we edit our title? We don't even know what it is yet. It's a dev meeting.
No, I gave you the title yesterday.
Did you?
Us and them or something like that.
Us and them.
Just look on your private chat.
How about to be disclosed?
No. Here, I'll do it.
To be disclosed, and we gotta grab the chat.
How they took over the world by keeping us drunk.
Oh yeah. That could be
Some
good.
powerful shit, man.
Pretty good topic. So of course, this all ties into our our developments. So we've come to this place, this position in time, in space and time, somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing how that somehow is gives us context for what to do in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the chronology of systemic, what do you call it?
Spectacular systems.
Spectacular systems, yep.
One of the older documents we have.
Yep. To kind of give the story of humanity, of civilization, of what's happened, and not a pseudo-history. So not necessarily historically factual, but based on what we see and what we know of the current state of things and the current state of society,
And
we
some
can
of it is-
derive and reverse engineer what had to happen in a set of plateaus that has arrived us at this point.
That isn't to say it's based entirely on a vacuum.
Right.
There's actual papers and whatnot referring to this kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, but the point is not historical accuracy.
No, and not to make it an academic sort of exercise, because the real value that we see out of it is the pattern, as usual. The pattern is what we're hoping to effectively capture in a useful way. By use, simply I'm referring to what you can do with such information in your current everyday life, and perhaps what not to do would be the alternative.
Yeah, and so this is all leading up to basically product development, software, physical, whatever it be. And I'm still it's all good. Trying to get, so our Portal Mountain chat is up. Our YouTube chat is, I don't think it needs to be, okay. YouTube chat, okay. Well, maybe things have changed and YouTube doesn't like to have its chat linked in that fashion. YouTube chat. Not sure if I need to bring this forward. Order, move to top. So maybe we don't have YouTube chat. Sorry about that. I know Eon came through last time. It was a few weeks back there. On YouTube chat. And
So, in the beginning, we was wild and we was free.
sure. Yep.
And then we discovered the grasslands. So the story goes, anyway, is that some time ago, phenomena occurred that hasn't been really a part of our history up until that point. My very basic understanding is that some environments became very suitable for enormous grasslands, like wheat fields, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Climate change, global warming.
Yeah, maize and rice, I think, were also
So
part
to
of
put this
that.
in context, what we're looking for is a point of major divergence where we once had kind of a tribal unit where the and life cycle where the elders would teach the young people, and everything kind of was able to stay on course in a way that people treated each other with empathy by default. You weren't by default the enemy of each other. And we're looking for that point of divergence where something causes what we call a breakaway civilization, and that's that the tribe and the elders lose control of some portion of the tribe, and it breaks away and becomes other. And in a cancerous sort of fashion, its growth explodes, and it no longer, even within itself, has this sense of empathy,
Or
like
control.
we are neighbors with each other.
Yeah.
So you have the mind kind of taking over and saying, well, I can get rich and powerful, right? And so this is why we're looking
And
at
so even
grains.
your own tribesmen become potential enemies on that path, because it might block that path to power.
Mhm.
So yeah, the catalyst seems to be, and I mean, this is again,
It's pseudo-history.
it's a
It doesn't matter if it's
pseudo-historic-
real or not, but it
Um,
seems very plausible.
It's one of the most plausible areas in terms of research. That's just a bias of mine, in that these fields, once they became accessible, the tribes that would have seized control over the area would have been egalitarian initially, of course, but with that control of the field came an economy based on a feast. Since these fields would not have immediately become a primary food source, as that would mean that the tribes would have to depend on something far less secure, in terms of in terms of ongoing lifestyle. So these were more of a luxury that they stumbled into. And from our understanding is that the first utility of them was not for food production actually, but for the development of alcohol and other
Drugs.
other drugs, which is essentially substance. Because what we see as a pattern of cultivation, the initial patterns of cultivation circled around plants that were not food crops necessarily, or a primary food crop initially. We have cocoa, we have tobacco, we have poppies. All of these different plants were the beginning of cultivation, and wheat, before it would have been used for flour or any of those secondary uses, would have been a development that allowed psychedelic use on a mass scale that was simply not accessible before. And so this access to mass production of alcohol would have allowed something that would have been traditionally relegated to the shamanistic ritual of myth making and all of that. It become more of a entertainment sort of feasting product. It would have been used to entice other tribes into a feast, none of which is an evil enticement, to be sure. Everybody was sort of in on this initially. Like the idea of a feast is very lucrative from regardless, but because you have certain tribes in control of these areas and other tribes not in control of these areas, you have a dynamic in which obligations can be made arrangements for obligations for the tribes that go without. And so
So if your tribe has no access to these fields,
yeah,
or whatever,
you could potentially, but you still have the desire to participate in these feasts. So a trade deal could be made, for example, of field labor in exchange for participation in
Right.
these.
And so even this idea coming up that another tribe, like, I guess there's always been, like, you have to think, like, there must have always been territorial battles and all that kind of stuff. Like, some tribes just happen to be more warrior-like stance, more aggressive, and there is that self-other, right? So, like, tribes...
So trade was a thing already because of that.
It must, yeah, trade must have already been a thing, and this idea of having people who are not part of your clan was also a thing. But this, the breakaway civilization, we're seeing a tribe that even within itself is completely atomized.
Yeah.
And against itself.
It starts to manage itself in accordance with these trading agreements, to the point where if a few generations are removed, where that's like daily business, the ideology of the past starts to sort of erode. Because there's no need for it. These tribes have now become sustained by other tribes, and conversely, because of this standing being more natural to them, would begin to exert their desired management styles across the region. They would exert how these fields should be managed by whom and when, leading to further actual conflict between these tribes. They would lead to envy. It would lead to definitely discontent within the have-nots, if you will. And I mean, you can already see the roots of class power and labor forces being robbed of its outputs already in these stages.
Yep.
which are essentially the main complaints of civilization since its inception.
Yeah.
So right at the beginning, the core the core fundamental change that brings about the difference in self-management and others' management is totally ingrained within the civil process itself. That's the hotbed from which it sprouted, so to speak.
Right. It's really difficult to kind of tease that apart, because even, like, so we've got other tribes maybe who are potentially enemies or whatever, just belligerent, but you've got kids growing up who are by nature going through climbing the degrees of coherence, as we would say.
Yeah.
Like becoming more coherent. So humans, you and I, are born in a state of complete ignorance, right?
Well.
And we have to be dealt with in that kind of transactional way, to some extent.
To some extent, yes. But and this is an interesting point, because this suggests that for some time there is a transactional way, but the child grows out of it. With this situation, you have a different trajectory happening in which the child does not get to grow out of that mentality, since the
Right.
system that's been developed out of this new economy
Mm-hmm.
cons- is now constantly injecting itself into
Yeah.
into the growing process, stunting it in a sense that it replaces things that would have been self realized with an with a sort of like a manufactured
Sound bites.
pre-made soundbite that would be much easier to digest and apply within within the runaway context, than to have to actually go ahead and deal with
Yeah.
the reality of it on your own, as it would have been the
To
case.
fully try and process.
So there's a luxury sort of provided for with that by making it easy, but what it does is it takes away the self growth that the individual would have had to acquire. And so this all really to say is that the process of growing up from a child into a fully realized adult becomes stunted and hijacked and remains in an incomplete state as more and more of these self-growth aspects are uploaded, so to speak, into the abstract realm of management and having these
Right.
systemic explanations
Right.
provided back to you
So-
out of the ongoing flow.
I don't know if we would be ready to go into this right now, but it's something I mentioned before that I wanted to get into eventually, which is to describe this stack of lessons learned of becoming civilized or whatever that an individual goes through in terms of these like carriers and agents, right? So what do you need to know? What's the minimal set to get to this plateau? What's the next minimal set to get to this plateau?
If
You know what I mean?
commodification, so we're talking
Yeah.
systemic upload, the systemic uploading process itself.
Yeah. So,
Right. I'm calling it an upload process because the picture I'm working from is layers, and in this case, a social layer becomes an upper layer to the mental layer, and so in that sense, it's an upload.
Oops. Portal Mountain. I just wanted to pull up that.
So many terms.
Moving out. I had to search for moving. So let me just swap over to scene 2. And so plateaus of commodification. This is from a kind of personal lifetime.
Yeah, look to what happens through an individual and how they're ripped away from their context.
Right. So we've got home, school, job, and I don't quite agree with these, but moving out, career, family.
So these are broad and they are open for discussion, but the basic idea is you start off with with the normal context of being born into your family, right? So at that
Yeah.
point in time, you can't really say that there's a commodification. It's more of a fact of life that the system has not been able to
Right.
categorize in any way.
And we're kind of taking some things for granted when we say home, like, because
Yeah, we're talking idealism here.
some children are literally just left in a basket somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
We're not discussing that kind
But yeah, so what this means is your home means you're basically subject to the complete supervision and control of some other of your environment.
Yeah, and it's
You're
very
completely-
biological in this sense. It's not yet
It's not like how to do the dishes.
it's not about like when an infant is born, for example, they're not expected to, contribute to the chores of the house or anything like that. It's a far more human non-natural interaction between the parent and child. again, ideally.
Right. Yeah, so
So school marks the first ripping away from context. So this is basically
before we do that, do you think it might be helpful to go through the stack verse tribe, city, state, empire, nation, corporate state, virtual state? Because we're supposed to be drawing a parallel here, right?
sure.
Because what civilization has come up with over all this time, we in a single lifetime are experiencing those layers as they build up inside of us.
Well, I think it'll be easier to go top down in this case because the individual experience is more immediate than the abstract historical one.
Right? Yeah. I guess it depends on your preference, but and the reason I would say that is because
But we can actually take we can actually go step by step through each one and say, well, the home idea and the tribe idea is very similar.
Yeah.
In that it's one coherent unit. It's not trying to sell itself anything, right? Like you're not talking about you're not there to you're not hired to do somebody's chores or anything like that, right? So we're talking about a similar situation except in a much bigger scope. And instead of a single lifetime, we're talking about generationals. So that would be
Mhm.
the difference between home and tribe. It's literally the same idea in a different scale, time-wise and size-wise.
Right.
One is for the individual person, you could say, what happens to them. One is to the tribe itself as as a unit of individuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea to compare because we've done a lot of development on that second stack there, starting with tribe.
Yeah.
Like we've
So,
talked
so the
a lot
tribe's
about it.
parent in this case would be nature itself. Whereas you can see school is an artificial setting, and so is the city-state. It removes nature outside of, it removes one outside of their actual setting. That's the main takeaway from. So in the city-state case, for example, the environment becomes land. This land versus that land versus this other land. In the case of school, it's like you're in this class, you're versus that class. Like you're just mixed in. You're mix and match based
Right.
on some category.
Now let's bring in another piece here, which is the holon from the holonic approach. We have the archetype coming up in the city-state, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what that, from my perspective, what I've understood of this is that this is like the ability to commodify something, like the
So the city-state is the commodification of the environment into land.
right. But if this is the archetype, then we are going to see. So we've got empire and nation coming after that, which we would reflect as abstract and concrete, respectively. Right.
Sure. A nation is the remnant of an empire.
So if we look at it holonically, which we're supposed to be able to do, what we're getting when we upgrade to the city-state is that is something that's going to be carrying through to all the other layers. So something that's core and common to those. And in my opinion, it's that ability to commodify something, like that this becomes this type of a piece of land. And then on top of that, this person is taking this role.
Yeah, so this is where school and city-state have a match in that the state requires roles, the school provides the roles. Right? So basically the difference between a home and a school is that the home is self-caring for itself, whereas the school removes the care from the self onto the system. Right? The school gives you roles, not to manage your house, but to manage your house as a unit within the city-state, as a producer of it, as a business within it. And so what the home becomes in the city-state is very different than what it is in the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Be right
For
back.
sure. I think we might as well just pause it here quick for a break. Fine.
If you move a little over
Here we
there,
go.
I won't have to smoke in your face.
I don't care. He's fine. Okay, where were we? We were here, and then we were here.
Yeah. Moving out.
With
Job.
one of these. Okay, so about the point about and I don't know if you articulated it this way. I know you've equated the archetype or the mimetic with the city-state, but so how this makes sense to me is that in a tribal situation, you may remember certain hunting trails and paths and like berry patches, and things come and go, and it's just whatever it is. It doesn't matter, but
And there's a story behind it, a myth.
sure. In the case of a city-state, you're having this, so the commodification process, you're having some kind of like probably warlord who really gives a shit about his power and keeping it that way, right? So you want to build a wall, and the wall has a certain...
Well, that's the only concern that they would have.
Yeah, right.
That's their job.
So if there's a piece of land that's within the purview of that dictator or whatever, it has a specific purpose, and the person who is dealing with that land, maybe it's farming or whatever,
Yeah.
they have a role.
And they have to be that role, or they can't be there.
Right. And at this point, it's all kind of ad hoc and mixed matched, and I don't think that specific roles have really come up, other than what's obvious, like a warrior. Like if you're good at, but maybe everybody's kind of good at...
It would be the same roles repurposed that we've had from the tribal areas. So the warriors, you have your shamans.
The obvious archetypal stuff, yes.
Yeah.
But we're going to have all kinds of more specialized roles come up with just to fix all the problems that this city-state causes, right?
Right. So it's going to have the role expansion is going to be specifically because of its new tasks. So
Right.
the output of these tasks will need some kind of management tool to deal with them. For instance, the fact that you are
counting.
the fact that you're now removed from your context in terms of your role, and you have to do somebody else's bidding, for example, is going to create a bunch of well, health issues, especially if you're coerced violently. So what do we do?
Not to mention management to make sure you're
Yeah,
doing
so
what you're supposed to do.
doing what you're supposed, watching over you, all of that kind of stuff. So all of these creates kind of new jobs like policing, like treatments, exorcisms for the heretics or who don't believe in this system. A whole bunch of different measures now become fundamental to the maintenance of this power structure that has developed out of the economy.
Right. So there definitely are some new kind of roles that are going to come up, but it's the fact of having a role and that this person is now doing that job and this piece of land is set out for these people to do that on it, and everything becomes kind of known to the mind in its commodified form,
which
right?
feeds right back into its bias that the whole everything that it's dealing with is actually mind knowable, specifically the nature that it's trying
Right.
to commodify, that it in its entirety is actually a mind knowable mechanism. So that's
So
another alienating attitude.
So this is still kind of like a swamp of not very solidified or anything. The city-states are, you'll have one city-state looks one way, one city-state looks completely different, until those roles become reified. So the feedback process feeds into itself, and roles become solidified, and that I think is when we jump up to the next plateau, the empire, and this is where we have, I guess, the guild system starting to form, and where you have roles passed down generation to generation because they've become so properly defined, you could say.
Well, an empire is when each individual city-state is actually functioning as an organ of a much
Right.
bigger.
And how do they do that? We look at the internal structure. How do they do that?
By repeating the same, right? It's the same
Exactly.
mechanic. It's the same mechanic, but on a much larger scale.
So when you have
And if you notice, a job is the same mechanic as a school, except on a much larger scale. You're still supervised. You're still cattled.
the
and-
school teaches you generally how to approach, how to have the ability to have a job.
Exactly. And
Right.
then while a school is sort of like like your single city-state, so to speak, the job market is a bunch of them working together, which is a lot like an empire. So this
Right.
is this is the analogy
Yes.
being made.
So yeah, and this is great that when we compare school to city-state, that to me solidifies this idea of city-state being an archetype which can just unfold into so many things, and
Mhm.
as a lower layer, that's what you want, so that you can build layers of complexity on top of it. Same thing with the school. It's a generic, teaches you how to read and write, do math.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also very specialized in that this school is for law, this school is for.
Sometimes
Oh.
they have that, yep. But also they teach self-esteem, right?
So this is the basic stuff, and then there's the specialized branches.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that, like, the self-esteem, this is a perfect archetype example. You're reifying the ego structure, right? To
ensure
attach,
it's there.
to attach roles to it, and to weigh roles onto yourself like baggage that you have to carry around, and you're not allowed to remove it.
Right.
That's
Else you're.
this is the
else-
archetype.
Else you're a troublemaker of some sort.
Right. So then we've got empire, which is where we have specialization of roles, and we have the economy really coming up within the city-state. That's what allows it to be connected to other city-states, is when you have a
Yeah, and
regularity
And specialization
of commodity.
within. So, for instance, this city-state is responsible for all the copper production. That one for all the lead.
Right.
Together, they end up poisoning everybody else, but who cares, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can have trade, for sure, yep. Yeah. So
That's-
that seems to fit well. How about moving out? So let's go empire to nation. And what we're having here, so this is the concrete in the Hellenic triad. We are having management
Well, yeah, an empire is so
and
large.
certification, and this is the proper and only way to do this.
And so, like, if we're to look at, say, modern nations and look for quote unquote the empire behind them, well, we have our Western Empire, we have our NATO, we have our, all of these coalitions
Yeah.
that fundamentally move off of a single ideological description of what power is and who is the so the role of the emperor, so to speak, becomes a much more abstract idea, where each location, in order to self-manage better, gets their own version of that. But should they move outside the specification of that role, they're no longer allowed to enact the will of the empire within that realm. So another one gets removed. So we see this in terms of how people get removed from power by other warfare and stuff like that, invasions.
I'm kind of seeing the network of empire as kind of a dumb machine which can easily be circumvented by better thought, kind of like management.
Yeah, if only it wasn't so violent as
Right.
well. That's the other. It tends to remove that kind of a problem for itself, using a much lower layered techniques, by just removing their ability to rise up within the power structure.
So we're having, it looks like a kind of, I don't know if it's a switch, but it seems like this is a point where top-down management is really introduced
Yeah.
instead of kind of like.
But also, at the top is now a far more abstract thing than some person sitting somewhere
Right.
doing shit willy-nilly as they please.
Yeah.
Not that this was really the case ever. Every emperor out there had to satisfy
Right.
the pulls of everybody involved, and so most of them essentially get assassinated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not a glamorous position to begin with. Now, instead of assassination, in that sense, it's a much more abstract idea, so you can't assassinate it, and B, it's constantly recycled through different people who simply fit the mold,
Right.
without needing to actually have a maintained generational power structure anymore.
Yeah, and this brings up that kind of great challenge, in that there is no physical enemy here, and it reminds me of the saying that it's a spiritual battle, not a physical one, of what are the ills of our society and what to do about it. There's no person you go kill, there's nothing you go set on fire. Like,
Well, I mean, you can do these things, but they end up being as you were saying, reified.
it reinforces
Those things end up reifying the actual problems,
Yeah.
rather than the solutions to them.
right, because then of course the system, quote unquote, has an excuse to clamp down.
Well,
For example.
see, because because the emperor is not an abstract concept, it doesn't have any problem with catering to the ill, so to speak, with lip service, by removing one variant of one of the heads of the Hydra, so to speak, and replacing it with another,
Right.
much seemingly more reasonable, seemingly more whatever. So,
Yeah.
like Trump and Biden right now, the entire narrative there is, we have a bit much. They, I don't know, but they have a much better president now. Much better president now.
Right, the States.
But
we don't
but,
live there.
But it's such a small little unit of
Right.
communication that it actually has no bearing on anything.
And this reminds me now of the whole virtual state and virtual reality, that we are also tied up in politics and left and right thinking, which is completely off the mark of if you want to actually fix things or help do anything. Like, we're
Well,
completely distracted.
The left and right thinking only gets you to a situation where the other person is wrong, and we must fight that other person. Like, that's the priority. And so
Right.
if that's so, regardless of the content of the individual position, the net effect of the having the position winds up being the same. You just get angry people on both sides,
Well,
not willing to communicate or say anything to each other, but rather only at each other. And right or wrong, the point being made that functions are not are nullified. So that's
what functions?
the content. Like, even if the content of the position is correct,
Oh, like
it's
what you're trying to
completely
do.
yeah, it's completely nullified by the fight itself. Because regardless of position, the only thing that's happening is a fight.
Right. And does this not lead back to basically the problem of identifying with specific rules? So we are taking on an identity of one particular, like, political identity, and therefore we are kind of taken over by that. And anytime we see someone who's other, we have to fight it.
You're hitting on the logical problem that humans have in general, and that is the way we approach inclusivity is by being exclusive. So
Right. And this is what
So-
bothers me about identity politics, I think.
So if you try to be this diverse group, you are automatically excluding people who are quote unquote not diverse. Like, it's by
Right.
definition. So you have this conundrum of trying to solve your problem by actually perpetuating it.
Yeah, diversity only.
Right, so-
no non-diversity allowed.
And it's not like you can't label things, and that's the and just not if you leave. Look, the other approach people start to take is like, I'm colorblind, which is absolute bullshit, because at that point in time
Yeah.
you're just denying a different problem.
That's ignorant.
Yeah,
Willfully
like-
ignorant.
So it's not like you can ignore the fact that there is color, but you can't be racist at the same time. So the solution there isn't to necessarily never talk about racism, and it's never to negate the truths of one side or the other. It's rather to understand that all of this is happening at the same time, and all of these things are interrelated into each other in much more complex ways than
Yeah.
the conversation is anywhere near.
Yeah, or what your mind is thinking the situation is.
And if the mind will never jump that far into it, the superficial problems will just reappear all over again, because their root causes are not based in the narratives that they produce. The root cause of racism is tokenism, and it has nothing to do with diversification. It has everything to do with trying to climb a ladder over everybody else, trying to be like your ideal, and at the same time the
Right.
people in the people who you're trying to be like an ideal with try to make it look like
This is that
you are a failed version of them.
that ego structure, like where the ego likes to slot itself with other egos into making who is above and who is below, and the mind always creates these categories of who are you, what type of person are you.
So here's something that nobody seems to actually realize, that as soon as you say if racism is like the real problem, and this race is the problem, you eliminate this race, what happens in the system? Well, the people get divided again based on a different criteria.
Yeah, it just
and
keeps
they're-
happening.
And a different form of distinguishing. I mean, England, you could be discriminated against based on your accent. You
Right.
don't need to be black only. You can be just. There's so many different aspects to this to exclusion.
Yeah.
That
It's never ending.
focusing on one aspect is never going to actually resolve the core issue of exclusion.
Correct.
Racism being a huge problem simply because of its proportions, and that isn't to say that that isn't an unimportant problem to address, but if we leave it as the problem of racism without looking at the problem of exclusion, without looking at the problem of power and class and tokenism and the different ways that people are pitched against each other to begin with, which is these are all symptoms of being pitched against each other for
Right.
this reason, that reason, this finding any reason to pitch people against each other.
Right.
As long as those aspects aren't looked at, the conversation about racism will never get off the ground.
Yes. So this comes all the way back to what we just started talking about in this stream, which is the breakaway civilization, where it started, why it started, what happened there.
The
and
incidental acquisition of power through basically a climactic change.
Right, but it was just waiting to happen. And the elders lost control of the tribe. Basically, pieces split out of the tribe, and they lost control because people were not educated or whatever to.
Well, they were drunk.
That, yeah, I was thinking about that. That's another whole other part of it. But so when we bring up social justice and all these current issues and all this, the solution is to understand the problem. There's no other solution other than to understand the problem. And it's not a simple thing to understand that the mind itself acts in a racist way, in a categorical way. Right? And because it sees colors. You can't not see colors. And yes, and we have encouraged it to exist like that to the point where that's our only reality that we understand. Right? So we have to be able to pull all the way back and say, okay, yes, I'm going to make a judgment, and that's not because I'm bad, but I don't have to vocalize that. In fact, I can be aware of the fact that I'm doing it, that other people are doing it, and if somebody becomes excluded by that, there should be intentional injections of behavior to correct it. It must be corrected. This is the whole anti-racism thing, in my opinion. That's where it comes from, because the mind categorizes. It causes unfair situations, and we have to address those proactively, I think.
Proactively, reactively, and in the moment. Proactively simply would be making a habit of paying attention to exactly these happenings within the mind.
Yep.
Reactively, because there's never going to be a situation where everybody is on the same page with regard to all these issues.
Yep.
And so you must be able to actually know how to react to that while never forming the habit yourself. And on top of it all, that's got to be an everyday thing. So it's in the moment activity,
Right.
Without which neither the proactive nor the reactive aspects actually work in any useful way. I mean, it becomes a source of guilt and idealism if it's not a matter of constant awareness, because then it becomes an abstraction that you contemplate only but never engage with. And when that happens, not you, but when that happens, what tends to actually happen is that the thought, due to its merit, remains. The lack of action to this thought builds up, and the guilt response is a way to channel the stress into basically useless activity, which is exactly this is another habit that the
blow off
system
steam.
Yeah, this is another habit that the system encourages, is to take that steam off into its and make it a systemic input. So pick up a movie, pick up a bag of chips, pick up spend some money on yourself, whatever. Just feed your little need for addiction of dopamine hits that the stress is making you crave. for release, right?
Yeah, coping mechanism, I guess.
A superficial way to
Yeah, and it always seems
put an ointment on
it always seems easier to kind of put off of dealing with some systemic deep issue to just put it off on the surface level and like deal with it superficially.
That's why I was pointing out the habituation of it. That like schooling, for example, is a way for this always relegate your problem to the authority. For example, like school insists on it that you cannot resolve problems between yourselves. That
Right.
you always must find a mediator from within what manages you.
Yep. Yeah, so I find it interesting to look at kind of larger, like the larger problems that people seem very passionate about, and this is like my critical activism type of angle, is that there's so many problems, and they all kind of, like the more you look into them, they all kind of point back to the same thing, and it's how are we navigating this world around us? And why are we doing it like that? And why are we doing that? That's because of this history that we've been through, right? Through these plateaus.
And the reinforcement of it on every single child ever born in these systems, of injecting this psychosis right back into them so that they will at least function as cogs of the system as they grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So perpetuating it as well.
Right. And so like it seems weird, but like something like critical thinking isn't really taught. Like whatever, like the ability to just, I don't know, think for yourself. What is it? Like it's been squashed out of school now, it seems.
You're taught not to trust yourself. You're basically it gets ingrained into your head that your opinions, your own instincts, your own feelings, your own perceptions are not valid. Only that of the system that you're being fed abstractly
Right.
is valid. What you can read on paper is valid. What the teacher told you is valid. What an authority is telling you is valid. What you think, you should not trust yourself. Oh, peer review, great example of this delusion. Peer review simply is a consensus of popularity. I mean, sure, it has a knack for weeding out bad sciences when the experiments themselves are fairly simple to set up and require
Yep.
pretty mechanical reasoning behind them. That's fine. However, on subjects that science has no bearing, no scientific consensus is going to ever be useful.
Right. Yeah, like in the case of like spiritual sciences or whatever you call it.
Well, like say science has nothing to say about purpose, about meaning, about
When you pass the threshold of
about
the
love.
neuron, right?
Right, like it has no bearing to say things about like love, for example. All that science could tell you about love is there's a chemical called serotonin. That does not translate to the experience of love, which is in a completely
Right.
different realm of
And oxytocin.
of motivations and existence, about which chemistry has no input. So the mistake would be is to try to figure out exactly which neurons are being affected by these things, and then figure out that they called it with this one pattern love. Meanwhile, that's just an electrical pattern that we're talking about. It's only the love meaning has only something intrinsic to itself rather than anything that you can read about it externally. It's basically
Right.
a word that has no correspondence in this regard. And so it's a totally useless endeavor to try to
Right. It's more on the experiential side, but that doesn't mean it's not a valid endeavor to learn about or
No, how to see how
understand.
to see how a neurochemical network works is absolutely gratifying in itself. But um, my biggest gripe is when you try to assert that the patterns and the signals are the objects that we would call this concept and
Yeah.
that concept.
Yeah, this is again a typical reification.
This idea of mapping the pattern as an object.
Oh, I know
and
what
say-
love is. It's
and
when
s- and
these
say-
chemicals are released. Duh, in the presence of another. Like, that's what it is? Okay, no.
Yeah, because love, just to put it bluntly, has to do with a person's internal story and monologue, which is a far more dramatic reality than the chemical one. So things like the things that motivate and move things around in that realm are not logically equivalent to particles and
The drive towards objectivity is understandable because the world around us is fairly regular, right? You can perform experiments and they happen over again.
the world is regular, and in terms of survival you need to be able to make distinctions in split seconds. So from that perspective, taking things out of context and putting them into a different context of a running of a mental system makes sense. For example, there's nothing inherently scary about enamel and bone structures in themselves, but when they come in the form of sharp teeth coming at you, you know, you should run. Right? Like, objectivity has a purpose for sure, but
Mhm.
it's becoming more and more apparent to me that this kind of objectivity is a fight or flight response, not the regular state of the neural network itself. Because when we talk about, say, the default mode, as it's called, it's not. It's daydreaming. It's fluid. It's
Right.
not. It's not objective, and it's not rational, and it's not logical.
Yeah.
So the relaxed state of the mind, is not a rational one.
I do want to get into that at some point, and it's again related to this whole stacking. And I think probably in school, the archetype that's installed is that of this this ego, self-esteem thing, which can accept roles and which never drops the roles. So you're always from one thing to another. You're wired in this mind world, just
Mhm.
always spinning gears, and you can never drop them. And this is unlimited anxiety.
Right. So if we assume that the relaxed state is not a calculative one, then the stressed state, the one that where you're escaping predators, the one that you're hunting prey, where you're actually making predictions and calculating, this intense state is not the one that we were built to have prolonged utility of.
Right.
It's only after we've given ourselves no choice but to constantly use it, or else our survival depended on it, that we took it as normal, and we've gotten to a point where we school our children to such an extent that by the time they're adults they know nothing but.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so this amounts to a perpetual normalized state of stress of which no one is aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is something that's difficult to describe, kind of, but if people who are listening to this may understand what it means to relax and to be able to kind of drop out of that kind of stress response and out of the rat race, so to speak, especially if you've had one of these kind of spiritual rebirth type of moments, then you understand where our work is going, the depths of it.
If you find that your free time is watching, only watching television, passively watching other entertainment, engaging in active stress gaming, which is something I do myself, so no saints here. All of these activities, searching through feeds on Facebook, constantly searching for news, these responses are the continuation of the stress response, and the inability to do that kind of relaxation where you're engaging your default mode network. Like, it's so engaged that it cannot let go, and this neuroticism keeps cycling until, well, in my case, insomnia and just weird shit like that, where the mind just keeps cycling through thoughts, and it just won't stop. And it's a calculative thing. Like, it's not even a daydream anymore. It's more of a this and that and the next and then the next and then the next and then the next and just it. And
there's a reason for it, and you
notice that if that happens to you, you don't fall asleep. That's because it's actually that's the alertness responses. That's why you can't stay awake.
And the reason for doing all these things that you can't stop doing is linked in somehow to your self-conception of who you are and what you do in space and time. Whatever it is, if you're playing video games to get that stress response, like somehow in the back of your head you're thinking like, I'm learning about guns and tactics and all this in case sometime I get into a gunfight or something. You know, like there's something behind the scenes that links that activity into you personally, and it never stops.
Or just being a better shot, or being able to do this trick or that trick, or
binge watching like YouTube tutorials and stuff like that, or like how
becoming an expert.
Different lifestyles. You're imagining yourself being in that lifestyle. That's why you're binging on it.
This activity in itself is that kind of stress response.
Which one?
What we're doing, like why we're
Speak for yourself.
Why? Well, no, this is not. We're calculating right now.
Yeah, no, we are in that, but
I'm just saying, like this kind of what we're doing is also a part of this. It's part of why we have to talk it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's because of all the load of that loaded energy that's in there, and we need, our neurotic need for output is still there, and so. Because like if that wasn't
enjoyable.
The case, well, yeah, it's gratifying. But if it wasn't the case, I'm fairly certain we'll just say fuck it and be monks, and that would be it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
With that, Mr. Monk.
Break time.
Short one.
Yep. Oh yeah. No, I know this is that point. That's a good point about being, and that's anxiety. I know Zumi loves to talk about anxiety, and that's brings up another chart, or the affect chart, which I guess we don't really need to get into right now, but the conceitedness reaction to affect being aversion, attachment, or callousness.
Yeah.
These are all anxious responses, right?
Yeah.
So your mind is kind of buzzing that something needs to be done. It's because you're inserting that self into the picture, and the self is propelling you. Which
yeah,
seems
it's being
weird, but
so conceit in this case is not just how this. There's always going to be a self-referential aspect to this to experience.
yes.
Because there is the contact being made with
The five gates.
with the external object
Mhm.
and whatnot, but
So difference between the false ego and this is the real ego is what we're just talking
so yeah,
about.
so
and the false ego.
So the fact that the self-reference is there is a given, but what also happens because it's such an intrinsic part of experience, that self-reference can also then get compared to to a perceived otherness of something, and and you would compare it as a same, better or worse than that other thing, maybe your ideal self, for example. So that calculation of comparison will drive either an aversion or an attachment to a particular narrative that will move the calculation into a more desirable state. So if you're the same and you want to be better, for example, that's you'll get an attachment to the narrative that perpetuates that
Right.
result. If something is worse, for example, or something is better than you, then you perhaps want to eliminate it.
Right.
And you're
so
averse
that's
to
the
it.
conceit.
Your conceit is to ignore it, is to say to yourself that it doesn't matter, so it amounts to neglect of something, and often it fires back in a very unexpected
Wait.
ways.
What so but
Callousness,
what
or-
you're calling so what you're calling conceit, though, it seems to be that comparison engine.
Yeah, a comparison engine of same, better, or worse. So
Right.
self-reference is normal. Conceit is optional. And even if that calculation does not take place, this is what's called altruism.
Right. I'm just bringing up that chart because
When it comes to altruism, your affect is recognized as being there, but it's recognized for being there, not for its potential need to move the self from this position or another position to somewhere else. And so the pleasure and pain and callousness elements of it, or neutrality of it, don't register as
Here we go.
attachments and aversions and neglect.
yeah. So this chart here, I wish that that we could see the mouse so I could point to stuff, but it's broken up into two sides basically. Aside from at the very top there, we see empathy, sympathy, and memeplex. That's kind of the dividing line. On the left side, we have altruism right below that, and then on the right, we have conceitedness. And conceitedness is what's mixing with affect, which is near the very bottom, leftish affect, to create attachment responses to pain, pleasure, and neutrality, leading to aversion, attachment, and callousness on the very far right side. So this is a calculation of inputting the self state as either being desirable compared to something else,
Or undesirable,
yeah.
or sameness. Sameness is is sameness and callousness and all those are basically grounds for boredom and restlessness, in which themselves turn out to be versions.
Hmm.
Because now that you're bored, you're now seeking to alleviate the boredom, so to speak. You didn't get
Right.
something out of it, so now you're lacking in something.
So I just wanted to get at one specific kind of point. How is it exactly, or what is it that how do we define conceit exactly? Like what it's doing?
So the memeplex as an archetype is self-referential,
Mhm.
right? In the sense that it is the information that comes from it is both of the object and the subject at the same time. So
Yep.
so there's an object out there being in relationship to here.
Right.
So there's always that something together with something else. So this something else is the self-reference. It's a completely what's the word? Transient thing. It's just like
Mhm.
if something is out there, then there's in relationship to here. So that's just the calculation
Comparison.
that feeds.
So that's
into
a normal comparison.
Yeah, it
We
just
always
feeds
make
into
that
the
kind of
network
stuff.
as that. So if there's something out there, then by definition there's something here to channel the out there.
Yeah.
So that self-reference is there, but
Mhm.
should that self-reference be made into a real object within the thought process, you now have an arbitrary object that is called a self,
Yeah.
to which you can now compare the situation and say, is the situation preferable to it or not, or
Right.
okay with it and ignorable. And so that little tiny bit added into the mix is what's conceitedness is, and the making of the self real in the calculation gives the narrative a real
Yeah.
object through which can be moved.
Instead of just the in context self.
Instead of simply realizing, oh, in this narrative this is happening, and then
Yeah.
because of that, the narrative about the narrative is the one that's actually taking place. So that's the difference between the two. Whereas
Mhm.
one, you're attached and keep the narrative going, and the other one is the narrative is
It's,
recognized for being what it is, and is no longer becomes about the content and becomes about being a narrative itself. And
It's
the content
a very
changes.
very subtle thing, but it seems to me like that object which becomes like the fetish, I guess, the self fetish, it becomes
And
something
it's never
that,
the same. Every
something
moment is
that-
different.
But this thing is somehow sustaining over time because we keep coming back to that.
Because this
object.
calculation keeps happening.
Right.
Every time this calculation keeps happening, it reifies this self as that one object, as this another object, as this another object in the time. But the theme then becomes a narrative, right, of there being an object that is real within all of these situations. And then that gets
Yeah.
fed back into the conceited stuff and compared to. And then that gets
Right.
fed and compared to. And as long as
Yeah.
conceitedness is playing a part in it, the pleasure and the pain are going to be driving that narrative rather than pointing to facts about that narrative.
Right. Yeah, that's tricky. Anyways,
This is how you can get programmed.
so yeah, and you become the pinball in the machine, pushed around by
Is this
reward and punishment,
Do we have a?
which
Never
is
mind.
something I wanted to get into later in relation to games in general and how life is a game in a sort of way. Reward, punishment.
The systemic life would be, yeah. Well, no, the natural life has that as well.
Right.
In that it can kill you if you're not smart enough.
And it's gonna hurt.
Ouch, pain.
So I wanted to see if we can go up this stack, just continue off kind
Mhm.
of what we were doing there. With the tribe, city, state, empire, we got up to nation. That's where we kind of introduced the management aspect and the kind of
the uploaded emperor into abstract space.
Yeah, where the emperor is no longer like
But this
is untouchable.
so the next layer is just more virtualization, really. So now you upload the president, so to speak, or the puppet emperor. You upload that into the abstract, and now the nation is divided up into corporations,
Okay.
all of which supply the emperor.
Yeah. Okay. So, but wait. So these last couple are probably confusing to me, but
That's because they become far more virtual.
We can try and move through them in a structured way.
So, okay, maybe I can help you with that by jumping all the way to virtual state and basically say that the emperor lives within each individual.
Okay, before we do that.
So that's so look, I just keep that end game in mind.
Yeah.
That image. So that's the final virtualization state.
Fine. We'll think of how that makes
each
sense.
individual upholds the full programming of the
with
system.
the fact that, yeah, right. So the emperor, in other words, lives within. Yeah, I see. Not as if you are the emperor.
No.
In some sense, but that the emperor has been installed.
Yes, we call it a conscience.
Okay, so tribe, cities, city-state, empire, nation. So I just want to carry forward with the holonic aspects here and see if this is going to make sense. So city-state, we had the archetype or the mimetic. Which should we use? Which dimension?
I never really think about it that way, so I'm not sure.
But it does make sense, doesn't it?
Archetype model guild?
Yeah.
Well, sure. The nation executing as the thing on land with borders, being the final concrete aspect of it. Because corporations are fluid, and virtual state is ultimately entirely fluid.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the very least, to me, it seems it would make sense to start with an archetype, right? Because then that diversifies into the layers above, right?
No, it makes sense because then the archetype being... you can move the archetype into city-state, empire, and nation, and then use the next three layers as model and guild, and it would work. So
for corporate and virtual?
So if nation is archetype, corporate state is model, virtual state is guild.
Right.
If empire is archetype, nation is model, corporate state is guild.
And we've seen this kind of sliding movement
it's the same
before.
sliding as before, exactly. That's actually always going to be true for any one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to do it that way, it's actually not clean mapping because you can have these different options. So tribe,
Right.
city, state, and empire, again, you actually get the same virtualization because in this case, tribe is not the same kind of tribe. We're talking about like a culture, if you will.
So maybe the way to approach this is then to, just as what we're saying, kind of identify the archetype and then what comes up out of that. So depending on which place you start, where I prefer and what I've been trying to understand.
This is the most concrete. That city-state, empire, and nation is the most concrete in our minds because this is what we see out there.
Right. So that to me makes most sense. Archetype, model, guild.
It's fine.
But we can move this up.
Yeah.
So
all we need to know there is that when we move the window down, right, the older versions get uploaded into a more abstract scene, like the APS basically. So we're moving from having a concrete empire set in stone with an emperor and blah blah blah, to the idea of all of that expressed here, 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 and here, and here, and here.
Right. So if we were to just slide this window down, instead of the archetype being simply the idea of commodifying things and having set purpose and categories for people and the roles that they're doing, regardless of what that is exactly. So that's our archetype. We're moving down to empire, where the roles themselves are the archetype. That's kind of the the bed on which the rest of it sits.
Yeah, the people behind the roles don't cease to exist as something that's being managed. They're not recognized by the
Right.
system anymore.
Yeah.
Like Bob and John don't matter. We only have Farmer.
Interesting. So by sliding this down, we've lost we've made people interchangeable.
Yeah.
We don't care about them. It's roles are what matter, and this is how you build a corporate state. And the interesting thing about that you were mentioning before about moving from a nation state to a corporate state is the corporations completely slice across nations and just and gut the nations. They don't give a shit about nations.
Right. And so whoever runs the nation at this point is whoever is supplanted by this pseudo president from the corporation, right? And they become interchangeable from the corporations. That's what we're seeing in the U.S. You get lawyers, you get businessmen. You get lawyers, you get businessmen. Lawyers, businessmen, and then one position, president. And sure, they're the emperor for the 4 years and whatever, and then next one. Really,
Right.
it's all transient and useless. It's just a show. It's a facade.
And so what we're seeing, though, as we get higher and higher, is this sort of DNA of roles and just how society functions, and the market machine, and this otherness, this
Mhm.
cold market relation with each other, is encoded into our DNA, so the social DNA, to the point where it's a completely background thing, and it doesn't matter who the leader is or who is filling any of these roles.
No,
The same DNA is what's happening to create society, and this is a breakaway civilization, which is not ideal.
yeah, like so.
It's not in the people are forgotten. We're out of the picture already.
Displace those people, and great point. People are forgotten. Displace the people, and they're forgotten. Displace the people, and they're forgotten. Only the roles matter. Only the positions. Only the
Right.
who was president. Oh, well, so that name only mattered for those 4 years. Great.
Right.
Well, what's the point in all of that?
They made the history books.
Right. but the meaning of it is what? That their name was on that piece of paper instead of that name?
Right. And could they have even done anything to change the trajectory at this point? And what can be done about it? And this is a sort of a foundation.
How
for
much
our-
of that person has actually made it past the paper? Right? Like, sure, the name made it onto the paper, but what else about that person specifically is in the history books?
Right.
Because every utterance, every signature, every single thing is systematized, right? It's enabled by other people that are part of that system,
And
and goes through a bunch of filters. And so all of these actions are not really of a person, but of a mechanism.
not only that, but how effective could they be when, as
Well, if it's a mechanism, there's no effect.
As we were talking before, the anxiety response or whatever is just to kind of fill it.
Well, yeah, all they're going to be doing is responding to their own anxieties, as a person, and so in terms of their systemic function for others is not going to be there. It's going to be only the same ego feeding self thing.
Right. So
Others are not going to be a part of that equation outside of how do I climb on top of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like any response that can be done, even by a president, is most often is something like a Band-Aid solution, right? Like something that makes it go away for temporarily, but you can't deal with.
If you notice, the best presidents are doing the quote unquote will of the people and are not there.
Or not where?
There.
Where?
If they do the will of the people,
Oh, they're
not even there.
They get JFK'd.
No, their actions are not theirs. Like they are entirely.
Oh, okay.
They're entirely.
And then they
a
get
face. They're just a face for what other people are doing.
Right. People are intelligent en masse. They're also dumb in mass, but they're
So it's another interesting wow, tip of my tongue thing. It's a contradiction, that the most effective president is not even there, because it only does the will of the people. Because the will of the people do not require a president to be there, right? Like
Right.
there's there's no need to manage that.
It's kind of like running a PR campaign for
I mean,
for the people.
The only reason that we quote unquote do need to manage that is because ideally that's what we have, but in reality there is no channel of communication between that position and the rest of the people, and so has to be a farce. It has to be it has to be just an image. It cannot be a reality, since nobody talks to the president, nobody gets to, and if you do get to talk to them, you're not going to get anything out of that. They're going to give you the yes, this makes sense, and yes, this, and yes, that, and then they're going to go ahead and they're going to be told that there's no money for this and there's no money for that, and none of this is going to happen because
Right. It's the state, systemic state. That's the ship. That's the craft that you boarded. So maybe we can just kind of finish off this plateaus thing. So we just bumped up to corporate state. So wait, job and then moving out. So we didn't talk about moving out.
so moving out is
and I wanted to reflect that with the nation state, which is this where you have we were
So-
talking about management and certification and this one and law and this one way to do things, and that's
so
the way.
so notice that in the jump between empire and a nation, the emperor gets uploaded into an abstraction, right? The
Mhm.
person gets uploaded into an abstraction.
Right, so you've got a president instead of a emperor ruling till his days are
Yeah,
ended.
and you no longer respond to your home. You no longer respond to your school president or whatever, or principal. You are now responding to your boss, which are shifted and shifted and shifted and shifted and shifted.
Right?
Sorry, we're on the moving out. So
Yeah.
not only so in the moving out part, what tends to happen is the support of your home is removed. Right? So so if you think of an empire and then it crumbling into different nations, right? The support of the unified physical framework is disintegrated into an abstraction, and you now only are relying on a somebody potentially executing it on a small scale over here. But it gets even more lost because the abstraction sits over here, so to speak, right? So they're going to defer their operations, and it's going to become more impersonal and blah blah blah. I'm not sure I'm explaining this correctly, but a similar event will happen when you move out, in that your home life is no longer a base. You have to keep supplanting it abstractly on your own. You have to recreate the home for yourself, so that so the parallel that I'm trying to really hit here is that a framework, a concrete framework that you could have relied on, is no longer there. It's moved into an abstract space of you make enough money, you pay enough to your landlord, and it's there for that month. It's there for that month.
I'm getting the sense of empire, but also like the sense of like either a family, like a lineage, or a community group cluster, like where things are, the way that space and time is all arranged is into one giant sort of ownership, like
Yeah,
with
so
the emperor at top,
yeah.
and you're all part of that collective. With the nation state, it seems like everything has been atomized.
Yeah, it's been
More so.
It's been it's a disintegration.
So you're moving out of that empire context
Right, you're moving out of your so
into something much more impersonal.
it doesn't line up in terms of so on the bottom one it's empire to nation, but on the top one it's home to moving out. So it doesn't line up directly like that.
But there are parallels.
But there are
between
parallels
job and-
between, yeah. So the job is the self-sustain. So when you start to self-sustain through your job, then through your home, for example, you've already kind of removed that connection that you would have had empire to tribe. So there is a parallel there in that your job becomes the abstraction of sustenance, and then that causes the final breakaway from nature or the
Well,
tribe.
isn't an empire sort of like reflective of a tribe? Just huge.
Yeah, just like a job is reflective of a home.
Where you have the lead, the chief of the tribe,
Mhm.
kind of thing. So
Same thing
So
with
we're
the job.
shifting that window down, and now it's the archetype here, the city-state archetype and the commodification archetype. This is where everything becomes fully commodified
Yeah, and role based rather than human
and
based.
commodified and interchangeable.
Hmm. So with moving out, now your home is interchangeable. Just like when a nation, you move from one nation to another, your tribe's different.
Yeah.
That's a similar
Yeah,
idea.
you're no longer bound to any kind of lineage or group or.
So just another context removing phenomena that flows out from the previous one.
Mhm.
And then of course career
That's
is when you
fair.
when you make a home out of your work. You basically a career is like so. When you have a job, you have a role within that job. A career is when you have a role within the grander scheme of society itself, right? You are carpenter. You are
Excuse me.
you're a programmer. You're
Mhm.
so your roles are like they're beyond any one corporation, really.
Right.
So this is also. So this is also where the corporate state is actually most powerful, simply because the roles are all bound up in the corporates, in the corporate functions.
It's interesting that the job itself becomes interchangeable,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the career is sustaining.
And even careers become, and even that got uprooted in the past few years. If you notice, a lot of people jump careers. So family,
Sure.
so family in this context is not the same kind of family that you would imagine traditionally, where we all stick for each other, but rather this is the expectation of the society for you to move out of your parents' house, to not to break away from them as a support system, and on top of this, not only rely on the system for sustenance, but provide an entire unit of dependent humans that will continue to perpetuate the cycle again, and start this whole process again for newcomers.
In other words, you will become home for another, for others.
Right, and
Mhm.
and in this cycle, it's a cycle of the removing of context, and so this family that you're creating is actually removed from the previous family. If you notice, it's not longer the same home.
Right.
And this is by design.
Yep. No generational homes.
Right, and so all lineages become meaningless in this situation.
Right. And so now we have basically the whole cycle. We didn't describe virtual state yet, but we have a cycle where you create a new home, a new family, a new home, new family.
Well, the virtual state is basically when you become such an agent of this whole situation, where you are a single unit of state, which exerts the state, the abstract state's authority in your environment that you're interacting with. That's what that means.
Right. Yeah. And so to start a family, that means you are responsible for putting another life through the commodification process.
Right, which makes you the virtual state in your home.
You are the emperor.
In your home, yeah. Unless you don't subscribe to the program. If you don't subscribe to
Right.
the program, you will be removed from as an emperor from your home.
Well, yes. Right. This is the tangly web of tripwires and snare wires and
So yeah, so this is the point of that, and of course the um, third
stack. Are we gonna
stack there
go down?
is purely mimetic in its description.
Right. So we have concrete,
Abstract.
abstract, and mimetic.
Yeah.
So and so to speak Holonic organization, this is the archetype here, which allows for these to exist.
Yeah, so
The abstract.
So so in the abstract with the tribe to virtual state, and then in the concrete for individual people
Yeah.
being born into a home, all the way to being dislocated from it and to creating your own disconnected family,
Right.
becoming a home for the next cycle of
And
workers.
so the way that we've tried to describe the relationship between this concrete and abstract here, this is a natural occurrence from the fact that this is the archetype that's happening.
Yeah.
So from the bottom to the top here, pure potential, we've got our tribe and our home. Spatial takeover, it continues on. This is
So the spatial takeover, so just briefly, it would be the abstract way of taking a space and dividing it up into different locations for different purposes.
well, this is what we were talking about with the archetype. Basically, you have this for that, and these people are doing that specifically.
Yeah, so this is where you get more direct expressions of that.
Yep. And this is the market and commodification process just taking root.
So now that you've broken up your space, consolidation of difference, for example, is a way to take all of these different pieces and rearrange them into a working machine, basically.
So you've got roles, guilds, special tasks to be done.
So
The
when you
economy.
do that, though, you have a problem with entropy. No matter what system you build, it's going to decay, and so this unity of a systemic thing is going to eventually proliferate. Right, the space going to keep being divided, and eventually this unity is going to decay simply because it's going to become contradictory to itself. That happens to every system that reaches a certain complexity.
And
so
so the response here was to like create certifications and proper ways of doing stuff to try and manage things to not go out
Mhm.
haywire.
And so this leads us into temporal tempering, which basically is a way of managing other people's time, what they do with themselves, whenever they're not directly inputted into the system. And this is a way to stave off the ongoing decay of its complexities, so that instead of the decay having immediate effects, certain aspects are pacified, some steam is
Right.
released, some.
So you're not only saying this is the proper way to do this and this is the proper way to do that, but you're saying, and this is your schedule.
Right, and if this one doesn't work, fix it through the schedule rather than fix that problem. And finally, all of that tempering results in a fully flushed out reality tunnel of where everything is supposed to click right in and nobody's supposed to challenge, and just smoothly be a cog in this particular reality machine.
Right.
Which
And-
corresponds to the virtual state of the individual being the state in their own home, which corresponds to the family unit creating a home out of which
Right.
to.
And so, to me, this speaks to the management of narratives
Mhm.
and the management of dictating reality and saying, this is what's happening, this is what's happening.
Well, if you'll notice, all of this is akin to creating more symbol sets out of the land, and the different things that are found in it, and then creating grammars and rules on top of that, and then doing that over and over and over again. But not in a way that corresponds to their welfare or
Right.
anything that
Yes.
has come before it.
This is all generally a breakaway civilization process, as we call it, culminating in this, what we would experience as like this mainstream media type of world where somebody else interprets the incoming facts for you. So you hear about events happening around the world. Okay, what's going on? You turn on the TV, somebody has to tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
That's the crowning achievement of this civilization, is basically that any narrative, anything that happens can be spun such that your worldview remains intact, because the spin takes those narratives, those
and your habit with those narratives, the way you're habituated to interpret narratives, the
right.
way you're
Yes.
the way you're habituated to get attached and and avert, and all of these things are utilized,
Yeah.
so that specific systemic narratives actually get perpetuated easier.
Right.
And they get perpetuated easier because of their addictive nature of dopamine.
Because you want to be right already. You want to be told what you already think, anyways. And that's what they do. But they'll spin anything that goes against the narrative, or it's you see it and you're like, wait, but all my beliefs are in question now.
So I thought, of course,
the media comes in and says, oh, but this happens, and then you get this giant sigh of relief because you know what the reality is now.
So you know how I was saying that the logical, rational mindset is actually far more energy intensive. It's
Yep.
much more deliberate.
Sure it is.
And sustaining it is a problem. I'm pretty sure, like, this is a guess on my part again, but I'm pretty sure this is what drives the propensity of the shortcut itself, because it's so energy intensive that your mind would
Yes.
rather hit on the soundbite and not deal with the complexity, because it's already exhausted beyond any redeeming point, that it can't be asked to do this
Yeah.
anymore, and that it has to take these shortcuts, and it has to go for the
Yeah,
stereotypes.
and most
it
people
has
would
and-
want to do that.
and that's a system feeding that to them, relieves the stress that the system is causing, all
Right.
at the same time, and it's so subtle that you just cannot get off the track.
Right. And it makes sense of how complex our world is and how complex our narratives and stories are, that when some fact hits, right, and it confuses you, you could have millions of people sitting there confused. And what is that confusion? It's this mind is racing for a solution, right? But here you've got the media who is set up with their think tanks to say, okay, well, they all study this, and this is what I think and what I think, and then they come up with a spin. So then the fact comes in plus the spin. It feels like a key fitting into a lock perfectly. And
Yeah,
you
it's a release. It's
and
such
you
a
just
release.
feel so good, because that thing you thought was bad no longer makes you question your whole reality.
Right, and this isn't something that happens to you consciously. You're not sitting there thinking to yourself, this is confusing me, this is what's oh, I got a key, oh, this looks perfectly. No.
Yeah.
This is all happening like
It's anxiety.
all instantaneously, so you don't even notice that this has happened.
Yeah.
But the feeling, the good feeling about the reality of whatever soundbite that was, it fitting in perfectly with another train of thought, just all of a sudden makes it a non-issue, and
Yeah.
and your addiction
You
is,
can forget about
and
it
your
then.
addiction is satisfied, and you're
Yeah.
just as ready to move on to the
Just
next
go on your way.
useless subject.
Yep. So we've arrived kind of at the top of this plateau. Hopefully we've kind of laid out the layers that have gone up through society to create this civilization. We're at the top kind of with this virtual reality,
Virtual state, like,
commodification of reality, of commodification of sense making. That's what we were just talking about right now.
Yeah.
Making sense, you should do it yourself, but we have services for this, right?
This thought is an object sold to you by corporation X.
Yeah. Right. So
Trademarks.
we're at the top. This is what we want to do with our work, is reverse engineer this and start coming up with a way from the top to make sense of our own reality. That would be the first step, to help, to give ourselves tools to make sense of reality, to do it collectively. This is with the DEC program, our
Dashboard.
autonomous organization dashboard.
Those
Some of the
ideas are all
first
flowing in the
things
same
we
way.
are going to do is, or what we are doing is learning how to retell stories and narratives, and how to track data like this, how to assess reality.
how to
Like-
put context right back into reality assessment programs that
Yeah.
we are stuck with.
Putting context back in, that's one way of saying it.
Because we're not we're not making the case that we somehow escaped this horror of a system, and somehow mentally are better equipped to deal with it in some different way. No, this isn't that case. This is just wading through that system to figure out what the fuck
Right.
we should be doing to
Yeah.
begin with.
We're in the weeds, but we've been working at it for years, and we've got some solid approach.
And to the point that conviction plays, this is actually a deliberate stopgap measure on our part to assert the fact that, despite the fact that there can never be a perfect knowledge of anything, especially transmitted word-wise,
Uncertainty.
that the system's game of self-doubt and the inability to trust your own senses, to trust your own thoughts, to trust your own validity in this world, so to speak, and always having to check with others for verification.
Right.
We're basically taking
for
a hard
consensus, not verification.
Right, we're taking a hard stance and saying that this is a disabling feature of systemic thinking that ultimately isn't going to help us. Self-doubt is ultimately not going to be helpful in self-realization of any kind.
Mhm.
And so, if you're of the mindset that self-realization is not possible without consensus, well, this entire line of thought will become circular and not reasonable and not rational, and that's fine. It's not going to be entirely rational, and it's not meant to be.
Yep, that's the point, part of it.
Specifically when the discussion regarding rationality circles around the fact that it's not the default mind state, and the fact that it's basically the vector of exploitation itself.
What's the vector again? Sorry.
Rationality
Okay.
is
Oh,
the
yeah,
vector
yeah.
of exploitation, and this goes back to all the way to the finding of Godel, in
Yeah.
that when you have axioms and you start making those theorems,
But it's
you
the
have
reification of rationality. That's the problem. 'Cause
well, you always
rationality is
get
normal.
you always get a reification of it because all these theorems keep building from each other, right? So it always works.
Right.
It always works. It always works. It always works. It always works.
Mm.
But when you start saying within the system that no truth statement exists outside of these theorems, right? You're wrong. Like that is the point in which you are wrong, and that is the point in which the system doesn't understand why, because it cannot reach those
Right.
theorems. It
That's
can
a
never
subtle-
actually calculate itself into those truths.
It's a subtle thing.
But the fact that it can calculate into it is a mathematical truth. So there's no point in really arguing that. Language itself says this. I'm not going to sit here and discuss the merit of Gödel's theorem. You can do that for yourself if you really want to. Really not the subject. But the fact that truth exists outside of any linguistic trickery means that it exists
Well-
outside of a rational framework.
This comes back to consolidation and decay. The stacking of layers. That's like a temporary truth, but it doesn't mean that anything outside of those layers can't exist.
Right.
Each layer below gives such a vast potential, right? When you're constraining up the layers, you're kind of constraining the
You don't even
potential.
know what the other constraints could be.
Right.
And when they start talking to each other, they come from completely different universes,
Yep.
which is why a nuclear reaction in a chemical context looks so frickin' ridiculously big.
Yep.
Totally different framework.
True story. Take a break.
Please.
Better back. unmute
that's
this.
perfect. That's perfect. That's like, sure, sense as the commodity being the product.
This is the pinnacle. You're given sense, so you don't have to make sense yourself. You are given sense.
And I would say that this describes my entire experience with modern life.
Yeah, sense is given to you as a commodity, as a product. You receive it, you accept it.
And if you don't, you're a heretic.
So this as being the kind of pinnacle, and it can't go any further than that. Literally, we have a state where people in society are completely detached from everything, from land, from role, from whatever. Everything and anything that means anything can be spun through the sense being fed to you as a commodity, such that you'll interpret it in any way that is needed for the thing to function. Like, it's a complete disconnect. We have a complete disconnect between what's going on in the minds of people and how life actually gets done. And so that there's like a complete shearing of the pie in the sky where we live and the reality underneath. And this allows bad actors and all such to continue doing whatever shit they want down here, while giving us the facade of the politician and all this kind of stuff, the corporate corporate values lessons and all this BS, right? So anything can be happening. It can be a war. It can be riots and destruction. Everything can be tore up.
Oh, gee,
and they'll tell you.
When did we hear about those?
They'll tell you They'll tell you whatever you need to hear so that you're okay with it. Everything is disconnected. This is the pinnacle.
They'll try.
This is the top, right?
The system does forget one thing.
And people...
They're still dealing with actual people, not an abstraction.
People which you cannot beat the sense completely out of. There will always... You can fool most people all the time, but you can't fool everybody all the time, whatever.
And this is why you always have the quote-unquote anarchists, so to speak, within the system, trying to mess things up within it, simply because it's impossible to actually put on the full veil of it.
Yeah.
The response is always going to be defiant because it's not natural.
Right.
And then the entire teenage angst that we feel by being forced into this is not at all an accident. It's literally the life being sucked out of the individual at that point in time.
Yep.
And of course they're going to thrash and fight and
Thumos.
and do what they can to escape the horror of being integrated like this.
Just even that feeling of rebelling and all, it becomes recuperated and back into the system.
You know what imagery it evokes? It evokes the imagery of a Borg assimilation process.
Of course.
And the poor individuals sitting there waiting their fate through the process, and it's just
standing in line.
Yeah, and nobody fucking wants to be there, and everybody's trying to run out of it. And surprise, surprise, every fucking school has a problem with its students somehow.
Yep. Until you're integrated, and then you're on the well-off side.
Or the disaster strikes or the shooting happens.
Yeah, it's mad.
Yeah, as if they're surprising though. Especially in an environment like the U.S., where these kinds of systemic problems are.
Well, it's worldwide.
They're worldwide,
Definitely.
but in U.S. you got a case of complete disintegration of the actual people. They're not. They don't feel like the U.S. is so big. Right, they don't feel like a single place.
Right, and it brings interesting points about like religion, family, community. These things, according to the underground deep state, whatever you want to call it, need to be destroyed because this is what can foster those anarchists, those rebels. It's a space outside of its own
control mechanism.
A tiny bit of a sanctuary.
Right, and no sanctuary can be allowed to thrive unless it has systemic output or market output of some sort, commodity of some sort.
Right, and even then, so this is the hunter-seeker algorithm.
So this is why you'll get
which seeks out any.
This is why the churches that
freedom.
hold on. This is why the megachurches are successful, because they're not the entities that foster these anarchists. The state-sponsored churches and everything like that are allowed because they deflect that tendency, that
Right,
the
they're a
tendency of
business.
the tendency of the human to be able to recognize that they're part of of something bigger,
Right.
and still retain their humanity. So, in the uncontrolled setting, right, this can foster into realizations about the system and its functions.
Right, but if you look at mega churches, they're not set up to
What
do
they're
that.
doing there is they're channeling that emotive outburst right back into the system by A, taking up your time, B, taking up your money, C, taking up your thought process, right? Let us pray for this, let us do this, let us
Yeah.
pray for Trump, blah blah blah. Like we all know what they're praying for.
Yep.
I mean, which one didn't pray for Trump? Out of the mega churches, I mean. So, and
Yeah,
so
most of them, probably.
So, but that's not even the point, right? The point is that the people that go into that church go from they do it from the same sense of not really feeling the system to be quite correct, right? Something is wrong. Something is wrong with the world. Everybody thinks that there's something wrong with the world. Like,
Right.
that's not a surprise to anybody. But being in that setting, you all of that frustration, all of that is just steamed away into another product, into another soundbite, into another tithe.
Right.
All of it is
Now-
now transformed into money.
This is interesting that we've painted this picture, because you can have church type structures, and they're perfectly positioned to be facilitators of the guild, in where you have small groups, which is
Mhm.
already a common idea for churches, that you'll have.
But even those get
um,
hijacked for whining.
But you'll have let's say your church has 500 people, and you'll have maybe like 15 small groups or something, with like 5 or 10 people in it, right? That would be probably a good number, right? But so these small groups, they can communicate with each other and with the community, and you can have this sense making apparatus come up which takes care of needs.
Mhm.
So people have needs, community, you got your ears open for who needs something, right? I want to be a servant, and I want to serve the community. And so you tell each other of the needs, and if you can't do it, well, another small group may specialize in that. And so you can have this thing arise which looks kind of like the guild.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you take the steps to make sure that all work is voluntary,
Mm-hmm.
that there's no coercion into actually doing the work, because what you want is ownership. You want people, you want the volunteers to be already invested in the outcome, rather than the payout
Right.
for some job that
In
they
other
could do
words,
for somebody else
they're
that they're
helping their-
not connected to.
They're helping their community or their people
Right,
around
like
them.
the sense of accomplishment and pride
Right.
is their their efforts are in the place where they're needed, and so the entire integration into the society happens through the actual functioning in the society, and the recognition happens through that as well. And I'm really stressing on the whole voluntary thing, in the sense that if somebody just sleeps all day long and whatever, that should not evoke a sense of anger,
Right.
or anything less. Like,
They're doing work.
Considering the fact that we have way far more than we need, functionally, in every respect of the phrase, that is not an issue. Work, making people do work for things, is not an issue. It never was, really. The only issue it is
Every man for himself.
It's for the system which cannot extract work from other people.
Shall pause?
Yes, please.
Pausing.
Hello?
All right. So we were just talking about the church and the guild, the church and the guild, which is awesome segue to where actually we want to go. I'm surprised that we hit on this, the mega church idea. So yeah, as being like kind of pinnacle problem, but
Well, people use church because they feel like the current secularized version of the religion is somehow wrong.
right.
But
And
that
it's a
church is
perfect-
just the same wrong, just in a different kind of context.
Right. But the church is like a perfect gathering point. Not perfect, but it's the best that we've ever had as far as where does everybody go when your community needs to gather.
So you could call it like also that in itself is a commodification by the system, because all of a
Right.
sudden the community becomes this abstract thing you're supposed to do out there by going to church, whereas no, the community is you. You already are the community. This extrinsic function, this extrinsic thing, to name it as something that you do out there,
Yes.
that's systemic. That is you playing market games.
Yes, and so there's a special place to go, instead of your neighborhood. Just go and talking to your neighbors. There's a special
Where you don't need
place
to go, you can be.
You get in your car and you drive like 15 minutes away, and you go to talk to a bunch of people you wouldn't know otherwise.
Right, and it has to be in that building. And it has to have these certifications to be a church.
Yeah.
And all of these things just basically break away. It's actually a hijacking of the communal sense away from the community as well.
But still, we don't have I don't know of a more potent rallying point.
Oh
for
no!
community.
This is basically this is a move the system makes to blow off the steam, but
Right.
what it can't do is put a full cap on it, and so
Not on this business.
No, and so whenever it does this, it also has to also break it up, and when it does it again, it breaks it up, and it does it again, breaks it up.
Right.
So you have this phenomenon happening. So.
So
Yeah.
I want to go after the idea of the church, and I want to frame it in terms of the guild, in terms of what the church would look like if it catered to the guild, right? And so we're talking about neighborhood churches. We're talking about little, like small scale, like everything kind of bubbling up.
Well, I can tell you one thing: Christ will be at the top.
Of course. And so instead of the emperor being installed inside you, it's Christ, right? Like the Grand Master.
And a point to that, when we say installed, in this case, something else is happening.
Yeah.
So the Grandmaster quote-unquote installation is not of a foreign object. It would actually be
Right.
the unfolding of the existing object that's already in place.
Yes.
It would simply be it would be
It's a marriage.
clearing. Yeah, it would be a clearing off gunk off of this thing that's already in place.
It's a marriage though of the yin and yang type of thing, because something has to develop to even apprehend what's going on, to make that connection.
So let's
right?
take out yin and yang, because I know Christians hate yin and yang.
Okay.
This would be the marriage between God the Father and God the Man.
The Son.
God as man, Christ. God as the Father, the abstraction
Yeah.
that lives outside of.
Right. And so what did
cognitive-
Christ do? He studied with his people. He studied like mad.
Well,
Like he was with people hearing them talk. So you gain all this experience. That's what I'm saying. You need to build up this something which marries with the ideal, sort of.
The
like
point
with the
being,
father.
the point I was trying to make is to take the living circumstances of a person, and the animal and whatever you want, the biological aspect of the nitty gritty, dirty aspect of the bloody business of living,
Yep.
with the ideology of how to move forward and develop and not progress, but growth, right? Self-growth, and not being sidelined
Right.
and killed by the happenings of the universe in the meantime. So, survival.
Right. And it's just kind of reminding me of a very common hyper-narrative, or whatever you would call it, where people go through this life, they go through all these homeschool, job, moving out, career, family, and they've got, so the archetype installed at school is this kind of false ego thing where you load yourself up with roles, and throughout life the weight just becomes so big, and you're shunted into the mind, processing never ending. Like we were saying, you just don't ever stop processing what's next
Until insomnia hits.
until some insomnia, whatever, you start getting sick, your body starts shutting down, and you're still driving 100%, and then
Crash.
something snaps, something breaks, and you're like, everything is like you're like, I can't keep doing this. Somehow you realize this thing which is control you is not real, and it gets shed. Something gets shed. And for me, my experience was a complete destruction of all foundation of myself and my body and my life.
So-
just all crumbled.
So just know that you had a special case of where you weren't fed pills to compensate for this
Right.
this occurrence, which is the experience of most people.
To
They do break,
yeah.
but there's no framework on which to rely on to tell them what broke
Yeah.
or how.
Yeah. Do you even
And then you get systemic responses, which all they do is measure, all they do
Yep.
is analyze,
Right.
and put you into a statistic, and you're fed this chemistry or that chemistry that pacifies this
Yeah.
neural part of the network, and that pacifies or
Yeah.
excites that part of the neural network.
Just like forces you to calm down.
And the problem that it caused this complete disconnect with reality is never resolved, but the disconnect from reality is reinforced with another method, and
Right. Chemical.
and the spinning continues
Yeah.
for most people.
And so, like, trauma theory or whatever, things in life that you've dealt with that creates holding patterns that you need to kind of dissolve them and be in them. You have to actually experience them and be in them until they resolve, and until you don't get that adrenaline and the trigger feeling. That process of healing trauma doesn't happen with drugs. Like, when you use specific, like, antipsychotics or whatever, happy pills to just keep going, you push
don't-
it under the rug.
It pushes awareness down.
Yeah, it's
it
dangerous.
it becomes difficult. So the same cognitive apparatus that gets you to this broken state because of being overdriven with logic and rationality and whatnot,
Tries to fix you.
and then they feed you pills that make it impossible to think. And not only are you stuck without the habit of simply being okay without thinking, now you have a secondary anxiety because you don't know what to do without thinking, and you can't think.
Jeez. Yeah. Right. Not
And how does that fix
unable to
you?
think straight. You're in a holding pattern.
And how does that fix you? It doesn't.
Right.
You are now forever in a cycle of drugs and inability
Right.
to. And then you die. And then that's it.
So there are definitely many psychological ailments and chemical imbalances that can really just completely screw people up. aside from the installation in this plateaus of commodification, the installation of civilization into yourself.
Just biologically speaking, it's a complex system, so of course shit can go wrong.
Yeah, in many ways. So we're not discounting that. Like, there are definitely people may need meds, right?
Yeah.
Like,
This is not a discussion of you don't need drugs. This is a discussion of drugs being used for the wrong fucking things.
right. And just to cover it up, without even attempting to pick up to
No.
relate to the psychological experience.
I speak of this, let's just cover this. I speak of this as somebody with a mother who's schizophrenic on medication. I am not for her not being on medication. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So there is a fine line between help and potential for help and actual ability to do so versus complete disregard for actual human need,
Right.
which also creates a lot of ailment.
For
So-
sure.
So there's a few different nuances,
Yep.
and just to be sure, the nuance of actual medicine and healing ailments are never questioned. That is just as natural and normal as it would be for a tribal society to engage with healing than as it is in this society to at least try. As we said, broken
Yep.
people, sure. Have we lost all of our humanity? No, that's not possible.
Right.
If that was the case, this conversation would not be on the table.
Yeah. And so in probably all cases, it seems like there could be a much more compassionate, empathetic approach.
That's the tragedy.
Yeah.
That's literally the tragedy, that despite the fact that everything
To-
we have is not evil, that the path we could have taken could have been far less mechanical and far less grinding and
Right.
far less in need of constant babysitting.
We're at a point of just ham-fisting everything as a society, though. Like, you just pummel and pound and pummel, like, it's as if we don't have fingers. Everybody just, you only have a clenched fist. And that's tough. That is rough.
It's sad.
Yep.
We're human and we're saddened by it. I mean, the motivation behind this work has always been circling around this.
The problem.
Yeah, and so while it is itself a kind of a response to a lack of control over something, it's not the kind of a response that seeks to reinvent the same problem that caused it. And because of that,
Right.
there's actually a lot of hesitations and in terms of how things should be framed and how
Yep. And how they get misinterpreted.
the misinterpretation is the first thing to just really like latch onto and sort of
Mm-hmm.
cover and
Yeah, we were talking about this,
re-explain.
like, so if we're
but
gonna,
it is also tiring.
if we're gonna present a system, who's to say that system isn't yet again gonna be recuperated
so
by the system?
So yeah, in this case, the system will be able to recuperate absolutely
And what do you have but systems?
until such time that you don't let it, and that is an individual,
Right.
An individual endeavor. There's
And-
no group think behind it. It's
So this is,
impossible.
to me, this is faith in the guild, because when you make relationships with
That's the
people,
grouping part. That's the grouping part, but it's not an authority.
right?
So
But yeah, but it's a relationship based on this coherence,
and I think
internal coherence.
this is the other problem. People conflate faith with authority as well, because look at the church system again. what you have faith in has authority over you. And interestingly enough, the secular system works in exactly the same way. Like, there's no difference outside
Yeah.
the naming scheme. You have to have faith in the system for it to take care of you. If you do not have faith in the system,
Right.
you are actually an outlaw.
Yeah.
It will not take care of you.
This is a doctor. The doctor fixes you. This is a plumber. He fixes your toilet.
If you don't agree with what the doctor says about reality, he fixes you.
Right. He'll refer you to somebody who'll fix you real good.
And if you don't get fixed, well, guess what? Your ability to navigate the system diminishes.
But
to
yeah,
a
like
to a point of entrapment.
the professional system, like this is we have faith in profession, right?
Yeah. By the way, the idea of a system is not a unified system. Just again, I think I've mentioned this before. It's not like a coherent one thing. It's just a bunch of interlocking, unaware of the other processes that just happen to snap together.
So you're trying to differentiate.
The idea of a system is being a single thought out thing, a planned out thing,
Right.
to an emergent thing
Right.
that comes up of
Yeah.
haphazard processes.
Right.
There's no conspiracy theory going on.
And
in
it
terms
is
of
always kind
defining
of
it.
haphazard, but in our minds we think it's whole.
Yeah,
whole.
we pattern it as a whole.
Yeah.
But that's just a human trait.
Right. And that's why we talk about the system.
Yeah, as a word, to capture it as an abstraction, to point to a thing, but it's not a thing.
Right.
It's just an amalgamation of things that we
Um,
can be talking about here, there, and there, and the other thing.
Yeah, we can talk about it in a systematized way, in that they're like what do you call it, domains,
Yeah.
domain
The
domain
only-
design.
the only way I would venture to define a system is you got a bunch of axioms, and a bunch of rules from which you can shift the symbols around a little bit, right? And then all the derived strings that can be
This is,
made from it are the truths of that system.
Carriers and grammatic capacity.
This is actually just the description of a formal system. Before you get to carriers, before you get to capacities, that's what you build on them. Formal system.
Right. Be right back. Yeah. So we're on a bit of a roll there, I think. Although I do want to maybe take
roll.
Slightly extended break. We've been making a point of, coming right back into it. Boom, like 1 minute, 2 minutes gone. It's pretty good.
Mhm.
So it's pretty nice for the audience. All one people who are watching us right now, I think. It's probably me. No, wait, was there 2 or 1? So 2 concurrent viewers. There was 5 at one time.
Wow, we're that boring.
No, 3 at once. Wow, look at that. At 2:30. That was an hour ago. But look at that.
Must have bored them to death, though.
Somebody joined us for half an hour.
Wow.
Thank you.
Cool,
Thank
cool.
you for that.
Appreciate it.
We've got somebody with us for like the whole time, I think, though, almost. Probably, maybe we know them. Hi to you. Greetings. Thank you for being our fans. We appreciate having fans, It is important.
All right.
Yeah, so all this stuff. So we're going to take a little break in a little bit, but we're just going to maybe chill a bit and wrap up our thoughts here. Where I want to go with this, I'm glad that we brought up the mega church concept and the idea of the guild in relation to the church as a beacon for the guild. This is where things should, people know what churches are, they know what they're for, but they don't do it because it's all bullshit. But if it was the guild, this is kind of there could be
This would be the commodified community that they
Right.
would actually should be aiming for
Right.
for that lost sense of it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So
that is the idea behind it. Yeah.
I want to get into that in specific relation to the products. So how to organize one of these church communities with the deck protocol, with the dashboard. How do you help them organize?
So before we tackle that, as usual, there's so many befores.
Of course.
The one thing I want to actually state outright is that these games, these products, whatever, they're still systemic inputs, outputs. So, from the perspective of the systems, quote unquote, they're not different.
So is memory.
Yeah. From the perspective of the system, though, the point is that we're not fighting it, right?
Oh yes, that's the classic point. Yeah, we're not here to fight anything or take a stand or do
Right.
anything.
So
We just want to be more capable.
So in terms of that,
We
what
want to make
we're-
sense of things.
What we're saying is that it's still going to be the systemic and the input and output, and the trick to this is not the undermining aspect. The idea is not to undermine human civilization to begin with. That's a retarded goal. by the way.
Buckminster Fuller said something about this.
It's a simplistic and a retarded, stunted goal to aim for, because it doesn't take into account any of the history as to how we actually got here in the first place, and
Right.
what happens if you don't do that, other than repetition. I just
What repetition? What do you mean?
look, if you don't take into account all the history and just try to erase what we have, what will happen?
The same thing over and over again.
Exactly. So the point is not to erase anything. You can't. And
Yep.
that is not the thought process that is happening here. And
Okay.
I'm stressing this because I know one of these days some of this shit's gonna come back to bite me in the ass.
So, pulling up some cliche Buckminster Fuller.
Who?
You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
Speaking of which, notice how everything that we've said has not been a change. It's been a reinterpretation of what existed. There's no change.
Right. Yeah.
Change is an illusion.
Uh,
A delusion.
Change always keeps happening. Though.
No.
Everything changes.
The kind of change that people think about in terms of
Right.
thought is delusional. That's not the change that. That's not the change that should be sought after or thought of when these statements are read. So this was confusing.
Right.
I find this shit confusing. like confusing badly.
There was a point in there, though.
Okay.
The point in there. Wait, let me just.
Mind you, I'm very strongly opinionated, so we all know this.
Let me
Grains
just
of salt, please. Grains of salt.
put this somewhere. So my main point with that was that people, in my experience, when I'm receiving input and seeing what's happening out there, in general, like to complain about what's wrong with the world and who's doing things wrong. And this comes back to the how do you form identity? By exclusion. So you
Mhm.
say what's wrong? Oh, they're doing that wrong. They're doing that bad. The alt-right is like this and like that, and
Okay.
or the left is like this.
So everything that's wrong is out there.
You're never saying what is right. So you could be completely ignorant as to what is a proper approach to life or this aspect of life. Never even think about it. All you know is what's wrong and what you've been programmed of what's wrong and what to attack based on your identity.
Right, as if what's right is to point out what's wrong.
Yeah. That's your only function. And where does that lead you?
Nowhere.
You're creating that wrong because you're forcing others into that identity, into the otherness.
Well, all you create is destruction then.
Right. So what is that?
Destruction. That is destruction.
Bullshit.
It's decay.
Bullshizzle.
It's just decay.
Yeah, you're cutting down. I don't want that. I don't want that. Decay, destruction. Right. So where is the creativity part? Where is the creativity?
Well, you don't need creativity because all you need to do is redirect inputs and outputs from the system into the system.
Well, whatever.
No,
Do you
but
know what-
I know what you're talking about. What I'm saying is why it doesn't happen. Like, if what you're saying is
Oh man,
correct.
my computer is like going so slow that it might even be screwing up the stream right now. Hopefully audio has been coming through though. Usually it's video that gets chopped. Okay, but I think are we good? Are we good? Okay. Never mind. Go ahead. Your point. Yeah, it just got all chopped up.
Sorry.
So destruction, we're just chopping down what we don't like. But what
Yeah.
about creativity? Where is the guild? Where is the model?
So the thing is that that's part of the attachment and aversion are not a creative process.
Right.
They are so from that it follows, given what we were saying, that rational responses being attachment and aversion to begin with, rational responses are not creative. They're only destructive.
Interesting.
And that is not a thought I had before. So this follows from what I was saying earlier in terms of rationality being a response to danger, to hunting and being hunted
Right.
and all of that stuff. That is not. None of this is a creative response.
I wonder. I hear what you're saying, but I wonder if we
So
could
now
we
we-
could probably follow that.
So what I'm saying is that it's probably the systemic response can never be creative because it follows from a hunter-seeker algorithm. It's only ever. You are actually yes. This is actually happening with Facebook and all of that stuff too. All it's doing is regurgitating stuff you're already doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all of its AI, all of its stuff is
Yes.
it's creating the mediocrity that it is.
By that definition of creativity, I see where you're coming from. Nothing new. In other words,
It's
you're
incapable.
taking things and
Rearrange-
in your rational process, you're just iterating. What could fit? You're like fitting every potential.
So like the fractal itself that gets built isn't a creative process, right? It feels like a creative process because of its growth and outgrowth and whatnot, but it's actually a mechanical process. So creativity isn't found in rationality.
Right.
It can't be found in rationality.
Yeah, no, you have to make the leap. That's I would agree. True creativity, if you want to call it that. Why couldn't I open this stupid image? That's all I wanted, but I guess I can't do it. So wait, what if I go like edit? Anyways, I wanted to pull up that
Mm.
that quote as a conversation piece. You don't just attack what exists, but
Mhm.
you just do the right thing instead.
Yeah. So the point about rationality not being a creative force is simply uh, on my part at least, it's a realization that it's a reactive force. So rationality is reactive,
Right.
and
I agree.
in being reactive, it's fine. Again, the nature of the beast here is that you just get to survive.
Yeah. Yeah, but so our whole mind is our whole existence is shunted up into the mind, and
But
by
and
not
this
being
drive to survive is actually another factor into why this is happening so naturally, and why we feel like this is the correct way to go, because that's what gets us to survive.
right.
And so, if we hijack that system to create a whole bunch of other things, we're going to be thinking that this is the creative system
Yep. Um,
as it survives.
it sure does. But so as far as creativity goes, um, the rational process, which is going on, before it even starts calculating, you already have the whole machine basically in
Given to you, yeah.
given to you, and all you have to do is so it's like comparing numbers. Like if you had to compare every number to every number, okay? So one through 9, let's say.
Mhm.
Compare all of them. So you go 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, 1 to 8, 1 to 9. Okay, I've compared those. Great. Now I compare 2 to 1, 2 to 2, 2 to 3. So you've already sketched out this rational system of what you're going to do to try and create a solution.
Mhm.
And it's just this is not creativity. This is iteration and seeing
Over what is,
and
yeah.
seeing what works, what sticks.
Hmm. So from that perspective, of course, nothing new is really created, only repeated in different ways, which follows nature, follows what nature does. Absolutely, in every capacity,
Right.
that does follow nature. Um, However, it is not what creativity is. If we are to define creativity as by newishness or novelty or any of those things.
Right. And I think you have to, like, for me, it makes sense to go into that kind of left brain, right brain dichotomy, to get the shape of the right brain, as in the emergent of from the neural network
Mhm.
of something completely new. Like, because
What
there's
it presents,
so many possibilities.
what it presents out of itself, yeah.
Yeah. Just
Each one being unique, of course, is the new thing.
it's very different from a rational process, which is a very controlled and very small subset of that neural emergence.
It's rational in its own different way. It's when you try to
It's
splice,
regular.
Yeah, it's when you try to splice these things together in such a way that doesn't make any sense, or when you get into problems. When you try to say things like,
Right.
when you try to say things like, this feeling is this pattern in the brain, that doesn't work. That's
No.
not the causal factor.
No. Or um, I got a message from this person when this was happening to me. So therefore somehow that's related.
And so basically, we're at a point with complex adaptive systems where we can say where rationality has to break down, and it's between layers. Rationality
Right.
breaks
It can-
causative.
Rationality. This is Godel. Something can be consistent within itself, within its own axioms.
But then a truth can come out and entirely outside.
Yeah.
And so in this case, what I'm saying is that sorry, I kind of lost the train of thought there.
Yeah, that's the difference between rational and irrational, the right brain, left brain. With the rational you have stacking, and it's within a context that's rational. But the irrational is
sorry.
way
What I'm
outside
saying
of
is that every time you got layering happening, causality breaks down, and so rationality has no bearing.
You mean when you're jumping layers?
When you jump layers.
Between, yes.
So as you have a carrier, and you create symbols on the carrier, and you create grammars on the carrier, you end up with whatever expressions, right? If you start to treat those expressions again as signals, right? If an expression becomes a signal, then the layer that uses the expressions as signal is causally broken away from
the one below.
The one below it, because it's going to be relying on its own internal grammars.
Correct.
Which are not going to have a one-to-one bearing on the layer below it. On the layer below it, it's a one-to-many. There's different ways of expressing that same thing.
That is correct.
So the causal chain is broken in each layer, every time. Rationality can never have a bearing on those layers. Well, there's a rational path between the layers, but those meanings don't have anything to do with the meanings happening within the layers. So again, the causality chain is literally broken. And that's actually the Buddhist realization of karma, of that causality still exists in a chain of events that doesn't seem to be physically connected. And we're just breaking it down as to where the actual connections happen, and that's between the layers. Expressions become signals, signals therefore gain their own grammars, and so on and so forth. This is why a symbol is not a meaningful thing, but a sign is. Because a sign appears in a context. It appears in the context of different symbols, which give everything signatures.
Sure, yeah.
The full pattern is the signature, making everything a sign.
Yeah, like you can't say what a word means exactly.
But you break it apart.
Try use it in a context, it has a very certain meaning, sort of.
Right. So, like, this is why words are defined by words. That's the horizon. Words cannot speak about anything else but words. And if you try to map words to realities, you get different languages, different cultures, different rituals, different everything.
I like that we are into the carrier talk again, and about layers of abstraction, and basically
that's what ties it all together.
This is our generic way of describing reality, is that everything, no matter what domain of behavior you're looking at, a domain-driven design, you have a language of objects, valid types of objects, and how they interact, and that's the grammar, and that's your symbols. And that's a way of describing all of life anywhere, anyway, and it hooks in with this holonic organization, right? So this is like a holistic.
So meaning arises together with language. They're not separate things. You don't build up meaning from parts. Words, for example, don't appear outside of stories. There's a reason for it.
And when you hear the story, and when you know what happened in the story, then you know what the meaning of the words is.
So, perfect example, William Shakespeare invented the word it.
No.
How? How did he invent the word it? He put it in a fucking sentence.
He put what?
The word it in a sentence.
He put it?
IT, the word it. Didn't exist before Shakespeare.
No. It.
I think it was that.
Yeah.
If you really want to verify it, find out which actual word it was. Because
as a learning exercise, that sounds perfectly valid.
Shakespeare is literally known for inventing words.
Very interesting.
And the way he did this is put them in his stories.
By using them through context, yep.
Yeah. So the meaning of the word was invented by the story itself.
Just how I could come up with some kind of contraption and show it to you, and okay, cool. But then you use it in the environment, and you see what it's doing, and then you know what it is.
And on top of that, that contraption would have never existed unless the environment was also a certain way.
Right. Yes,
completely
that's your
independent.
context.
That's completely
That's how you
interdependent.
describe the relationships between the things and the object.
And so the idea that a language is built out of words is actually stupid. A language is words and rules co-arising together. You can't have one without the other. Like, you can't have the Lego piece and then the Lego stuff. No, you create the Lego pieces in relation to the Lego stuff as like as one thing at the same time. Like you do
Context.
that. So the co-arising of layers is a very, very intricate sort of phenomena. So
Yep.
to bring it back down to more rational stances, this all happens through what's called a bootstrap, where you use a lower layer to build up the constituents of the upper layer to work together before they even know how to work together, by using the
Right.
facilities of the lower layer that you do know about to fake it.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the faking, you break causality.
Mm-hmm.
This is why in a programming language you state what a class is, and the programming just decides, okay.
You break causality. That sounds interesting.
What you do.
This is participant.
You're relying on the carrier to interpret the symbols a certain way, right? And so you're using that way to symbolize something arbitrary.
Participation.
So the meaning is arbitrary on the upper layer of
Right.
what this is.
But that's how I think.
It's like saying that this is X, this is Y. When you do that, you're lifting up unrelated things as X's and Y's, and so now here's where the causality is broken.
You think it's unrelated.
Here's where the causality is broken. You take this X and Y over here, you encode it and you decode it somewhere else. Encode it and decode it, encode it. So X and Y's appear in various different layers as X's and Y's, completely unrelated to the stacks below them.
So this has to do with, I think, participant bootstrapping by mimicry.
That's the activity you would do with a person.
Right. Let's
Yeah.
get into that right after this break. Wait, okay, we going? We back? We live?
So it follows that
Very quickly, though.
it follows that every time you have a coding, it's causally broken from whatever stacks are.
I mean, like a sound bite, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're causally broken in the sense that you have
They don't make
different-
sense across layers.
you have different stacks, but the coding appears an arbitrary thing that crosses this layer over here in this stack, this layer over here in that stack, this layer. It just exists across this like wave of stacks that becomes its own programming, and so it doesn't care about which stack it's executing on. It's disconnected from that, and that's what we mean by disconnected from context. These codings execute in places where if they do execute in this stack, they could completely destroy it. If they execute in that
Right,
stack,
there's that, yeah.
they reinforce it.
But so we were talking
so on and
about
so forth.
When you learn a certain behavior, you are considered a participant because you're being taught or you have been given instructions, sound bites, and you're simply trying to mimic some behavior.
Right.
And this is the breaking of the causality, because you don't know that layer that you're trying to go into above, but you start doing the thing, and before you know it, boop, you're up here now.
Well, yeah,
And
the
that's when you've
programming,
achieved membership.
The programming of the coding, so to speak, started to make sense as a
Right.
as its own internal
And
language.
the causality of it all comes together, and you realize truly deeply what you're doing.
Right, and so you could say that realization, in our parlance, then, consists of finding out the source of the break of the causality and, conversely, reintegrating that causality right back into seeing a much
Right.
wider picture
Right.
of the causal
So
effects.
this is a feedback observation. So when you're given instructions, or when you're trying to copy or mimic a behavior, you have a model inside your head, and you project that model out into reality through your own actions and behaviors, and what comes back to you are lessons learned. Did it turn out right? Did it turn out wrong? And this is how you suss out the shape of reality, right? And eventually that shape is what that upper layer is, what you get kind of initiated into.
Yeah, which is an age-old process of growing up. However, given the fact of what the system has been doing throughout this time, like commodifying every layer of this process as inputs and outputs of its own marketing sort of.
Alien commodification.
Well,
That's
I want to
what I call it.
I want to make sure that when we say this, that what we mean is that you trade all of these things for some currency instead of something that
Like
is
a
you.
a deep coherence, a core coherence.
Yeah, and so
Right.
through that interaction, it always becomes something abstract out there, which
Yep.
you never actually feel or
Great distinction.
recognize.
And yep. It's great always to point out that distinction, and it's
Yeah.
tough to even tease it out.
And it's fundamentally not. It's not possible to live in this world and not have these different things conflated upon
Right.
it. So
Yep.
part of it is wading through these conflations.
Always tricky.
So yeah, so the takeaway from this particular lesson, I guess, would be rationality is not the default mode. Rationality is in fact problematic if it becomes the default mode for
Right.
very specific reasons. In
Yes.
that you can never reach truths through it that are actually co-committant in your existence while you're trekking through whatever theorems you're trekking through. So if you're stuck on the content of your system, then you must just realize that there is true content outside of this same
Right.
system.
Great point.
That's as far as I'm willing to take it. So what those truths are, what they look like, what the truths were beforehand, and all
Right.
of that is up to you.
Yes.
But the
and
point
you may
is-
be standing on top of a house of cards.
point is, you will be standing on the house of cards if you take them seriously. Because no system can label all truths perfectly. Like, that's the mathematical truth behind it, and I'm not budging off of that particular point ever in my life.
So we've come up. So we've introduced this idea of kind of layering and the carriers and all that in the context of the guild system. Actually, this works perfectly, as well as degrees of coherence. We just brought that in with the idea of a participant jumping up to membership, and how does that happen? Through practice.
And the differences between that and systemic, purely systemic inputs and outputs, because there is an artificial addition that we keep in to make it work with the system. Basically, it's always an artificial addition to that system, in the sense of saying, okay, cool, we're just the system that cannot actually represent everything.
Right.
And in particular, like, there's going to be a scope outside of these realizations.
Yep.
So yeah.
And I was just trying to think of how to link that in with the embedding of carriers, specifically the fundamental, natural, and proximal carriers.
I would say you don't need to embed those, because they actually happen to already be there by context injected through life.
Yeah.
Which is why we're able to sort of piggyback on context to begin with, without necessarily having to invent one.
Right. I just have a feeling that's related into the whole thing.
It is abstract in the sense that it's talking about organism, environment, things that are out there, but at the same time, you gotta like look at it as, I'm organism, I'm environment, I am. So out there and in there is the same thing.
Okay, at least if we look at uncertainty as an archetype, all the things that we know in our current world, who I am right now, I know a lot of things. It's very certain. When we inject the fundamental, natural, proximal guilds, this is the triad. The mimetic is coming down into the concrete. We're admitting that whatever we think we know is a product of our life up until this point. And we all have lives up until this point. Every single one of us is walking through this world, learning, experiencing, and we've all come through a completely different path. And yet our natural guilds are convergent. So we've been learning about things because the universe is regular. So we're learning about things in a similar way, and to know the mimetic on top of that is just the
interesting. You should say that. I have a natural argument for this.
The
as well.
Bouncing between the concrete and the abstract to formulate one and the other right through time.
So a point I want to make that comes from nature on this is the convergence aspect specifically.
Right.
I was watching these. I don't know why, but I just started watching these prehistoric videos about the different animals and all the different body shapes that came out, and an interesting, peculiar pattern arises in that all the large animals that has ever existed have recycled the same body plans throughout history. So we'll have like a crocodilians right now. Long snouts.
Which one was there? There is one that recurred. It's the crab. The crab recurred like all the time. 5 or 6 times in evolution.
More.
Unrelated to each other. The crab came up.
Yeah. So crab is one example of this. That's a current with crustaceans. And this is current with crustaceans. But the crocodilian thing. So there used to be amphibians that looked exactly like crocodiles in the same exact areas of hunting grounds and whatever. Long snouts, Slytherin bodies, whatever. You get actual crocodilians that we know of today, crocodiles, whatever, alligators. But the ancestors to whales, mammals, used to look exactly like those fucking things. They would slither around the ground, have long snouts, catch fish on the shores, just like crocodile. Every single large mammal,
I see, yeah.
large animal, sorry, I keep saying mammal, a large animal that went through the same environment, so to
Right.
speak,
Yep.
developed exactly the same traits.
Environmental funnel.
And so, sure, we used to look at evolution as this like huge diversifying tree. But note something. Every large body plant tends to converge on the same things over and over and over again. We have the
As
same
a
herbivores.
stepping stone.
We have the same herbivore body shapes from amphibians, reptiles, mammals. I can't remember.
Yep.
We're getting the same things in different niches. We're getting the same kinds of plants and funguses taking up those places in the same niches, growing up to the same heights, doing the same things. So the long and short of this is that
Concrete, abstract,
all
mimetic.
of the divergence of life tends to
Come through funnel points.
converge at the same time. There's a false
Right.
There's a false
And this is
evolution going
because of
on.
the regularity of the universe, whatever you want to say.
And this speaks highly to the point that you were making, that even the social structures that we are going to be having must converge eventually, despite their diversity. It's the same process.
At some points, yeah. We're being forced through a funnel of the guild. We
And-
must do the guild,
And
or
my
it's going to be
personal
a shit show.
personal interpretation of this would be how Portal Mountain and Buddhism are the same things, restated in different ways. Language grew, concept stayed.
Yep.
Technology grew, conceptually allowed a diversification of how to approach the same problem. Same problem is being restated under those technologies again.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't matter. This is the idea of pure potentiality. It doesn't matter which layer of carrier you end up finding yourself on. Parallels will always exist to the lower carriers that make things work to begin with, and so the continuation to make things work is those parallels. And we see this in evolution as well in this example of body types, where parallel body types continue to arise for the niche environments that they're in. It's a really
Cool.
quite interesting phenomenon to address.
Yeah, and so we see the same kind of phenomena in like the guild system, or like even coming up from city state towards empire and all that, where you have roles developing. Like, you're going to have a blacksmith, you're going to have somebody who's good at working with metal, you're going to have somebody who's good at working with trees and wood. This is just going to be a convergent point
Mhm.
of certain skill sets and all that.
Because those are conversion points of experiences. You encounter
Yep.
trees, you encounter black metal, you encounter these things in the environment, and obviously there's only so many ways to take care of them.
Right. Right. And so now we are encountering this situation where we are all under the virtual reality, whatever we called it, kind of thing, like where sense is made for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, that's a convergent point where whatever is going to break out of this has to be making its own sense, especially together with others.
Mm-hmm. And
Collectively.
ultimately, what the system is powerless to do is to stop this from being yet another carrier, which nature just ultimately will utilize for its own expression. And
Right.
once that carrier
Right.
gets the proper harmony with itself,
Yeah.
the next layer can actually become more stable.
As in any current state is a full potentiality for
Actual coherence, yeah.
for coherence. Yep.
And that's the idea of pure potentiality.
Let's hit a quick break and then do like a power round.
Hmm?
Down with the power round. So we're pretty much, this lesson we've gone, like this stream, we've gone all the way up the stack from the history of civilization, our chronology of spectacular systems, all the way up through the layers, of pseudo history up to the point of virtual reality, where even reality is a commodity given to you, where sense is made to you, where it doesn't matter what happens in the world. If it's confusing, it will be, you'll get a narrative which spins it for you and gives it great relief.
And yet, that is the system's own weakness, in that it brought to you another carrier upon which another grammar can be built to make much more proper sense of the world and much more mirrored sense of the actual world, despite the fact that it's filtered through these enormously tenured sound bites that were never meant for this,
Now-
but became signals in the carrier, and causality got broken. And so this is where it cannot ever actually control itself.
Is
the
it-
causality will be broken in the carrier sense.
Is it the system's weakness, or is it its ultimate redeeming quality?
It depends on what you're taking the word system to mean.
Yeah.
So if you're taking the word system to mean the runaway process that we're encountering as the problem,
Yeah, then it's
then
this is a problem for
then
it.
this is a problem. But if you're taking the system to mean as an expression of the one expression of the model,
Left brain neural rationality.
just to manifest in itself,
Yep, rationality.
because the model has to manifest itself through systems, then it's a redeeming
Exactly.
quality for
Yes.
sure, because that means this is again the point of pure potentiality. Wherever that system is, the fact that it's based on the model can make sure that it wraps back around itself, recognizes itself, and at that point, once it does that, it can become isomorphic.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. Chances are it won't, because we have entropy to deal with. But the pure potential simply states
Right.
that
It does
the
happen.
probability is non-zero.
It does happen, and this reminds me of the Buddhas who is simply just awaken without a sangha or anything. They just come up awake.
Right. It's a
Right?
phenomena that is unstoppable in and of itself.
The system
You can
breaks off. Basically,
You can
off of that.
extinguish all the way down to the layers that you can possibly imagine, and it would still bring itself back up.
Right. So we are.
So we can all die, and it would still happen.
And we are working with that. So we're
Take it
gonna
as you
take
may.
a short break here, maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little longer than usual, and we're gonna come right back for a power round, and we're just gonna hit off whatever we feel like. Maybe get into cards, guilds, wherever it be. Burp. unmuting, but we're still AFK.
No, I'm curious. So you said I'm like in the 5%. Look, why? Why would I?
Probably. Just temperament. Right? But so we're talking about like academic, how do people who are trying to put forth the model and in the face of the system, how are they connecting? How are academics realizing each other, the connections? Because a lot of people have probably written and thought and done a lot of thought about
first of all, the isolating experience that this has had on me to begin with.
Model type stuff, but how do you get monetized? How do you get notoriety? How do you get fame and all this kind of stuff?
Which are besides the point, yeah.
So we expect that anybody who has been doing academic research and papers and all this stuff in our realm has been sidelined completely and would be difficult to find.
Most likely, yeah.
But each of these people who are producing these things, having this model view, are knowing and seeking out others who specifically are doing what they're doing, regardless of the system, right?
For the same
so
reason.
So there is this kind of underground network feel to the
Well, of course, like
to this type of academia.
The nature of the system is to, of course, give an underground network reality.
Yeah,
immediately.
That's what it is.
Like as soon as every theorem not captured by the system is going to be black marketed. Always.
Black market.
If it's not legal.
Yeah.
But it's still on the market. The reason I'm saying that is because another system will take over those
it's legal.
those
It's
theorems.
legal, quote unquote, but it's not profit motivated. There's no motivation for its.
Oh yeah, so
replication.
that's the Huxleyan.
It has zero.
environment.
There's zero motivation.
The Huxleyan environment is the top version of virtualization.
Huxleyan?
You're familiar with Orwell, right?
Oh. Okay. But I didn't know that there's some
The
structure.
Huxleyan is like the opposite juxtaposition, where everybody's quote unquote free to make their own decisions.
Oh, to Orwell.
But
Yes.
so in the Orwell
But
scenario,
they're captured by affect.
but they're captured by their own installed authority. So the differences between the authority being physical and virtual.
Right. And how? By affect.
So the Huxleyan society is drugged to the max.
Most likely.
And depressed rather than revolutionary.
Right.
So instead of taking it out on the enemy out there as the man,
Right.
you take it out on the enemy in here as myself as the failure.
Yep.
So rather than revolution, you get depression.
That's tough, man.
Which turns on the fucking dime as soon as the actual system is threatened, though. As soon as the system's threatened, all the Huxleyan shit runs
Lockdown.
away,
Fucking
Orwellian comes back into place. So there's a spectrum of, between Huxleyan and Orwellian. I like those.
Yeah. Fine. I see it.
They're good metaphors.
Yeah, it's a dichotomy of freedom, of limitations of freedom, with
And it's also
certain
West versus East.
responses of the state.
It's the West versus East symbology as well.
Which is traditionally which?
East being Orwellian. USSR.
And West totalitarian?
No, West being Huxleyan.
Oh, you said Orwell.
Free.
Orwellian to the east.
East being
Yeah,
the
yeah,
USSR and
Right.
China and all of that.
And this comes in with, interestingly, if you studied Japanese culture, they pulled forward the ancient systems of identity and saving face and all this kind of stuff, and honor. And think about that. This is almost like a Orwellian type of self-management. Like fucking check
Dude,
that out.
that game I'm playing, keep mentioning Ghost of Tsushima, the first scene, it's 80 samurai against an entire invasion, right? The only reason they the only reason they lose is because the samurai cannot fathom to themselves the tactics of the Mongolians. Actually, I'll go right back to the actual battle, actual Tsushima. What happened? So, at the time, when samurai were actually like facing, the two samurai armies were facing each other, the tradition was somebody will send out an arrow to indicate the beginning of the battle, to which the Mongolians responded with absolute laughter. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. This is a breakdown into modern warfare, like the steps to it.
Yeah, the secondary thing that the Japanese could not understand is that when they engaged in battle, like if they had like an actual army versus army thing, what would happen is that each individual samurai would call somebody out by name.
Yeah.
And they would be like, "I'm doing one-on-one with you."
Yeah.
And so they did
No,
that,
no,
and the
it's
Mongolians
obvious.
were just going as bands of warriors and killing everything in their path.
So you're like focused on one guy, and your head gets chopped off from behind, and you're like, "What the fuck?"
At least you would if you could.
You have about enough time to think, "What the fuck?"
That's about it. Yeah. So
Savage.
they couldn't. They literally were utterly confused by this. So they were so
that's
ingrained.
obvious. Even the Britain.
They were so fucking ingrained in this that they couldn't fucking figure it out.
The taking shots, like the muskets, Britain and American troops.
Oh right, the British
that.
would just like be
Like
on
the
the
last
battlefield and the
few hundred years, man.
and these guys would hide behind the trees and just stick their shots.
No, there's that began to happen. And that was the breakdown, obviously, in North America, where that broke down.
Guerrilla tactics always undermine these things. Always.
Yeah.
That's because you're going
But
to
they
you're going down a
literally,
different
a
layer.
whole army stands off against a whole other army, all lined up. They fucking horizontally, all lined up.
And then shoot the shit
And
out of
they're
each
like,
other with volleys.
and
Yeah.
fire. And okay, now everybody fires.
Okay, and which would give you the machine gun equivalent of.
Now you all reload.
Uh huh.
And nobody goes until we're ready to go.
Don't move.
Okay.
Don't you move.
And you just one after another, volley after another. People fall and some people shoot.
Yeah.
It's
And
like,
then
it's
the
like
red
fair.
and the red coat was to hide the blood.
Makes sense. Yeah.
The blue coat also hid the blood. Black coat.
Sure. As it would.
But it does give you an idea of what the fuck carriers do.
Yeah, like
And how
this
stuck-
is the type
how
of
stuck
battlefield.
you can be in.
Okay, so carrier discussion. This single battlefield, a single environment, let's say, in space time, is being occupied by multiple perspectives.
This is the difference with carrier and medium, by the way.
These two forces.
A medium can go between stacks.
One force understands this carrier, including the battlefield, as being one thing. The other force understands this environment, the battlefield, according to another carrier.
Yeah.
Right? So they're
Purpose.
engaging as agents according to those rules.
Yeah.
And they may or may not be aware that other agents are.
And then there is the
other-
tertiary
other
actual
agents.
system that is the truth, if you will, that sits on top of them that dictates the
This is
actual
an
outcome.
ideal. Yes, this is an
No,
ideal.
no, there's an actual layer on top of this that is dictating the actual outcome that is more natural, that nobody has control over, sits way above there that they're trying to negotiate
but you're
with.
talking about stacking of layers, but also the ideal top stack.
The yield top stack in this case being what happens,
Yeah, that's
rather than
right.
what you want.
But you can't know what that is until it is.
No,
what
but
is-
you're playing by its rules.
has happened.
But you are playing by its rules, you are playing by its
And
symbology,
this
and
is
you are
why
playing by its
you're
grammars.
formulating things towards an ideal agent.
So the one powerful is the one that has connection with this top layer. That's where power is.
That's also where sentience is, because it goes towards that.
Precisely. And but if we take this approach, and we look at what actually happens in the real world, then we can say that this sentience has never actually reached.
ever.
In an ideal sense, that's what you would
Yeah,
say.
all of the machines executing all
But
of the
you can
commands
also look at
do
these different
happen.
agents and see,
But nobody
oh,
sees.
according to this agent's history, you aren't learning your lessons. Right?
I'm not
You
entirely-
can look at the different agents and say,
See that this will be another
are
this
you
will be
learning
another
lessons
power
or not?
trip on top trying to assert another
right, but
symbology
we're
over top.
deconstructing. If you have an agent that wants to look at a battlefield and see what the agents determine the degrees of
So-
coherence of the different agents.
So when I mentioned the layer above, I did not actually mean it to be sentient. I just meant it to be like the actual
Well, I know.
carrying out of the
Yeah.
of the
an
happenings.
object
It's not
within the process of sentience.
Yeah, there's no
Fine.
there's
Yes.
no actual sentience going on. It's just still mechanics.
Yeah, but we're
That's right.
referring to an ideal towards which the
An
reaching
ideal
of-
would see this. An ideal would see this, I think, in the moment as well, as it's happening.
That's the
So,
probably tip top of the.
There's no
cake.
argument there, but I
No.
think I'm just tackling the layer just before the sentience happens, in a sense of like, regardless of their models, right, coming up their stacks and whatever, this causes yet another carrier to actually occur, which none of them are aware of. The happenings happen over here, and because they keep doing the actions within their model, they're not aware of it.
You're not talking about conceit, though, are you? Because that's kind of like towards
Conceit
that.
would be the factor that drives the actual narratives in play, giving the rise to, okay, we're in a better situation, we're in a worse situation, we're in this and we're in that. A battle is the space of conceit. Where am I according to in the situation? How do I get
Right.
myself out of it? Right? The battle, this is all you're doing. Which is why it's the same thing as the hunter-gatherer, the hunter-hunted scenario. How do I get myself out of this situation? Whether this being out of the situation means I get my prey, or I
It-
escape my hunter.
Yeah, like you need to rise up to that occasion.
Because after that, it's death.
Yeah. You didn't make it if you don't rise. If you weren't already pre-built to rise up to that occasion in the moment.
And so, if that's the case, it makes sense for these two models to be trapped within this ideology without recognizing the third. Because you're so busy with that narrative. You're so busy surviving. You're so busy. Again, time. Your time is taken up by the system. Your time is getting managed by the system. So whether that happens because of a hunt,
Yep.
or whether it's happening because you're being hunted by the system right now, it's the same process. Abstract or concrete. Right now it's just hyper abstract. But it's hunted. We're being hunted. And the system, if you will, is a seek and destroy algorithm.
That's a good way
only.
to put it. Naturally.
And what is it seeking and destroying? Any theorem that it cannot prove. But that
Okay,
happens
so
to
this
be,
is
that happens
interesting.
to be truth.
Because I was going to ask you, what was your thought on, because I brought up the term hunter-seeker algorithm, in the context of system seeking a model to eliminate any uncertainty,
Yeah.
right? System
So
wants to
this is
kill uncertainty. That's what the hunter-seeker algorithm
So this is
is.
it. So it's trying. So it's only trying to preserve the next theorem safe. If you're a theorem, you're safe.
You can have
You're
a seat,
theorem,
man.
Safe. But as soon as a truth comes up, which isn't the theorem, which will happen in every single goddamn complex system,
Yes.
it seeks to destroy it.
From the experience of this ego, ideology, identity, and all that,
Because it's a truth, right? Here's the uncertainty. It's a truth that is not arrived by the system. So
Something being
there's
asserted
an
as a truth.
untruthness to it.
outside of it. Otherwise, you would make the connection through your truth.
Yeah, and you wouldn't see it that way.
Cosmos.
But now it looks alien.
Yeah.
And that alienism is just intolerable.
Sweet.
To the theorem and eliminating the this is the seek and destroy algorithm itself.
I think it's a pretty awesome name.
And,
so
and-
just
and it is the algorithm that is used by peer review.
well, and so this gives an interesting commentary on the utility of the hunter-seeker algorithm, because the scientific method wants to develop things that are like this, right? So it sounds very bad, doesn't it? But this is the rational creation of knowledge systems, like of knowing the world and the universe.
And yet it's about eliminating competition. It's about killing and hunting and seeking, and yet it's about stress, and yet it's about... There is a very evil aspect to this, if you will.
Sure, yeah.
Like, it's so bad that we can't even define it, just like why it's so evil. It's like because it's so, in one way it's glorious and genius, and in another
Well,
way it's just dead.
Because it's the hand that feeds.
Thanos.
Fine.
Death, life, just one border. Binaries, order. This is what order is. It's defined by this death criteria.
Yeah. So this is the most basic border between the two, is the ability to describe life and death at a conditional and granular
And
level.
that's why Thanos, as a disconnected being from...
I
the
never
rest of-
watched it, by the way, but
Just-
you talk about him all
he
the
wa-
time.
Thanos-
So
the concept is basically, I want to kill half of the life of the
Yeah.
universe
so that everything's cool again.
so that the resources aren't competed for.
Yeah. Just kill
The
half.
binary decision of half you die, half you live, no consideration given as to why, where, when,
Yeah.
how, what, whatever. No, your life story does not fucking matter.
And even like, what if just by like the roll of the dice, you kill everybody who knows how to run the nuclear reactors?
Which is completely arbitrary, but yeah.
But they all died, and now the nukes are going up, and your whole planet is fried. So just everybody died. But it's only one little planet. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Your planet.
That's the
Your planet is
That's the
insignificant.
sickness of the system. That's the incapability of the system to discern truth as it is. Right? If you use a system to discern truth, you end up eliminating truth by definition. Gödel's incompleteness theorem mathematically
Right.
guarantees
So
this.
this is the basic problem of reification and the problem of navigating spectacle when you treat reality as if it's the map that you have of reality.
As part of those theorems, yes.
This is,
So if
as
you-
you
if you're going by
say,
these theorems-
superstition.
Gone.
Okay, but this is the core root problem that keeps happening. This is one of, if you're going to say what is the solution, okay, the solution is to describe
And
the
then we get
problem.
uncertainty.
The problem is we're pointing right at this.
So now we get uncertainty. What does uncertainty tell you? That the truths outside the system are far more numerous. By definition,
Sure.
they have to be.
Of how many more truths there are outside than inside.
That's the
Duh.
definition of entropy.
Doesn't that give you a proper
This should give you a proper
Context?
orientation for
Orientation.
sure. But if you're dumb enough to be a simpleton, you won't. I'm sorry. Look, I'm trying to like maintain the high. Sort of, but that is utter stupidity.
well, it's good to make a point, but it's very common to reify spectacle. This is the problem of the spectacle. This is why everybody is subject to sorcery
I'm
of the
pissed off
spectacle.
with the academic world because we had this truth from Gödel for so long now, at least a century.
Yeah, the nature of uncertainty
And
of stacking and
you
information
still
and
have
knowledge.
these fucking academics trying, and no, no system can do this. You will have more truths outside the system than in the system.
But what if
and
one-
the rational response
what if-
is the hunter-seeker
What if
algorithm,
one
you
truth?
motherfuckers.
What if one truth is so big it encompasses all of those?
Oops. Nope.
Oh, he explained it? Okay, never mind.
Like, you have the fucking definition here, man. Like,
Yeah.
you in your own goddamn worded
Yes.
stupid needs of completely
Okay.
context free.
You write it down on a paper, give it to your buddy. Now he has that truth. How many more are outside of that than are inside?
Add them in. Ask the question.
There's always an
again.
infinite number more outside.
Like, fuck. Every axiom you back in, you will always have a statement, I am not provable in this system. And every time you will have a number corresponding to this statement in that system.
Yep.
True. Cannot be arrived by any symbol shunting whatsoever. Never. Just cannot symbol shunt your
Yep.
way through it.
Nope.
Axioms be damned.
It's a different thing. This is the
Over
whole
and over and over.
holographic, holarchic organizational pattern in which things take this shape.
So truth and theorem.
And you have to deal with layers and interlayer
Point is-
communication.
Yeah, the point is to separate truth from theorem. Theorem being a truth arrived at symbol shunting. So if you've given these symbols to be true,
Yeah,
and you
this is
manipulate them in a
within
certain
a
way,
layer. You can do this.
You can have all this symbol and
Yeah.
this symbol and this symbol, and if these symbols correspond to some reality, cool. But that system will always have truths outside of what you're seeing. Always. No. There will always be truths that correspond to what you're seeing, but cannot be arrived at with the axioms you have. And
Sure. 'Cause
self-reference.
it's- yep.
Self-reference is the minimal thing that does this. As soon as you have self-reference, the causality chain is broken.
Yep. Because you bootstrapped out of.
Because a
Out
statement
of
becomes
what?
true about itself, and yet it cannot be arrived at the system, which makes it also true. The inability to
The
function,
bootstrap what?
the inability of you arriving at the sentence that says you can't arrive at me using the system is what makes it true. So, as you're trying to prove something to be true, to be false, right?
Uh-huh.
By trying to arrive at it using the system, you realize you cannot. And the very act of not being able to arrive at it via the system makes it a truth statement within the system. So the
Fine.
very content of the statement generates its own truth within the
Yeah.
mechanics of
Yeah,
the
I
system.
see. You're just breaking apart every single avenue of experience.
And because this is the case, you can never arrive at all truths. So if you're using a system to arrive at your truths, you will be lost. Rationality, therefore, becomes a useless endeavor for truth. If your hunt is for an all-encompassing kind of system, you will die trying.
Sounds about right.
And that is the waste of life. Being embedded in a circuitry, trying to find it and never arriving.
Of course, but
It's something never arrivable. And the system employs this uselessness into an energy generating
who
machine.
is going to hear this?
No, you are. But this useless cycling is what generates the power, the battery life of the machine. That sustains the delusion of arriving at stupid truths.
Mm-hmm.
So, truth, as it were, isn't thought-related phenomena. Because thought
Right.
can't arrive at it.
Yeah, in your dichotomy, thought and
It's the machinery that allows for thought that is true. because it's there.
Yeah, well, like,
It's not because it's with any like
you can
no abstraction necessary. It's
you
just
you can
there.
always say the what is a truth in itself. Like
Right.
you were alluding to that before.
But when
to
you start
compare.
labeling it as part of a cognitive machine, it's an arbitrary truth.
Right.
When you don't do that, when you don't
Yeah.
try to assign it a label in in another abstraction, it works. When
Yeah.
you do, it breaks down.
It's interesting because you want to say, I want to know what the truth of that thing is, but whenever you keep experiencing it, you keep putting your own map, your own abstractions over it,
And there,
your own interpretations, and that taints what it is.
so if you want to find out if a particle is a wave, and you keep observing it, what do you find?
Every time you observe it,
It's a particle.
too bad.
And yet, when it's every time you don't look, it has a completely different connotation to it. And the harmonics are different.
Double slit experiment. How could a single particle sent one after another create
An interference
pattern through a double slit onto a
And
photon?
also never do this when it's observed. Same thing.
Well, it does.
You imply your
The observing is the photoreceptive paper at the end of it, which you're going to look at.
The observant is the formulation of yet another layer on top of it, which has specific grammar rules, and all of a sudden the observation works according to those grammar rules. Interference much? The subject and object cannot be separated. The way a subject interferes with the object is the reality.
Yeah.
But apart from the subject, there is no object, and apart from the object, there is no subject. The two are not a dichotomy. They cannot ever
Yeah.
be separate things. They are part of the same
Right?
thing that bubbles up to yet another layer that takes the account of both together. And here's where the causality is broken. On the layer of those two things, they don't have a causality. Just like a molecule does not have a temperature.
You're talking about interlayer communication?
Right. A
Yeah.
chemical has a temperature because of the
Yeah.
combined kinetic motions.
Yeah, it's really interesting
But a
implication.
molecule only has kinetics. It does not have temperature.
So what this opens up is that at every layer, you're having like almost an infinite number of ways of composing the elements
What
of,
it means.
of that layer. And so the holonic approach of modeling a system is to acknowledge that everything that it's made up of at all its layers is decomposable to a pure potentiality at every layer.
Mm-hmm. And then, when you cross those layers, they may not have anything to fucking do with each other. Except unless you find that bridge in the bottom layers, and this is where you get into coatings and transfers of energy that seem
Right.
causally.
And that's what you have
incompatible.
to do. And that's where things arisen in the
But
first place.
objectification cuts out the layers, right at the bottom, so you only see the peaks.
Sure. Tragedy.
The idea of a medium breaks down. Communication breaks down. Communication breaks down.
Right. So that's the point of this way of modeling and communication, which is our product, is to be able to speak holonically, which keeps open this potential at all these layers, and always recognizing that
Just recognizing that communication happens in these layers is what's causing
each deck of cards is representing a different one of these layers, basically.
especially the way we
Right.
have them set up with the objects and object notation, then classes, then you know what I mean, like when you have more solid objects versus more abstractions of
Yeah.
objects, and then prototypes.
Yeah,
become
yeah, yeah.
Solid objects.
I like
is
that we
also
got
an
we
abstraction
got
of
into
an
that.
object.
Yeah.
Like JavaScript is great for that.
because we want groups of people to be able to organize in a concrete way about what they're doing in their projects, but also to be able to share that knowledge in a global community, which is when
Yeah.
you abstract your knowledge.
And every time you say I did this function, it could actually mean this thing for that project and this thing for another project. This is where you have classes, right? Classes or interfaces even.
Cool.
Where a single word means I did X means I did Y here and I did Z here.
I think we are pretty much wrapping it up for the night.
Right.
Honestly, it's been great, people.
Cheers. Sorry,